Picture this, the thick scent of charcoal smoke hanging heavy in the air, the rhythmic, almost hypnotic clang of hammer on anvil echoing from a simple workshop. This isn't just any workshop from the past. This is the heart of the Iron Age, a place of fire and transformation. Here, the blacksmith stood as a figure of immense power, a master of an element that both terrified and fascinated ancient communities. He was more than a simple craftsman. He was a creator, a mystic, and a keeper of secrets that were as hard and unyielding as the iron he shaped. Long before factories and mass production, the ability to pull a glowing, pliable metal from the heart of a fire and forge it into something useful, something powerful, something beautiful, was seen as nothing short of miraculous. It was a skill that bordered on the supernatural, placing these individuals in a unique and often revered position within their societies. They held the key to survival and dominance, crafting the plows that tilled the earth and the swords that defended it, and in doing so, they shaped the very course of history from the shadows of their forges. This video is an invitation to step into that shadowy, flickering light. We are about to embark on a journey to uncover 50 of the most enigmatic mysteries of these Iron Age blacksmiths. We will move beyond the basic history of smelting and smithing to explore the profound puzzles they left behind. How did secretive guilds protect knowledge that was passed down through whispers and demonstration, never written down? What are we to make of the artifacts discovered across Europe, and beyond that seem to defy the known technological capabilities of their time, objects of such intricate craftsmanship or made from materials that shouldn't have been available? These masters of metal did not just create tools, they forged the very stuff of legend. Their work was so awe-inspiring that it naturally bled into the mythology of countless cultures, with gods and heroes often depicted as divine smiths, wielding hammers that could shape the world itself. The line between the blacksmith and the magician was often blurry, and for good reason. So, prepare to explore a world where fire was a gateway to the unknown, and metal held secrets we are still trying to unlock today. This is a story of human ingenuity, of whispered knowledge, and of objects that continue to baffle archaeologists and historians. We will piece together clues from ancient ruins, enigmatic symbols, and the incredible artifacts themselves, asking what these blacksmiths truly knew and what mysteries they took with them. This journey into the fire and shadow of ancient smithing promises to reveal a side of the past that is far more complex and fascinating than you might have ever imagined. But to truly grasp the mystery, we must first confront the sheer improbability of the process itself. Iron, as it exists in nature, is not a shiny, ready-to-use metal. It is locked away inside rock in ores like hematite or magnetite, appearing as little more than rusty-looking stones. To unlock the metal, you must subject these stones to an intense, controlled fire, a temperature so high that it forces the iron atoms to separate from the oxygen they are bonded with. We are talking about temperatures exceeding 1,200 degrees Celsius, a heat far beyond what is needed for a simple campfire or even for smelting copper or bronze. Achieving this consistently was a monumental challenge. The question that has puzzled archaeologists for generations is not just how they did it, but how they ever thought to try. There is a frustrating absence of clear, step-by-step evidence in the archaeological record. We do not find widespread examples of primitive, failed attempts. Instead, in regions from Anatolia to India to sub-Saharan Africa, the technology seems to emerge in a surprisingly advanced state. It is as if the knowledge of this transformative power arrived almost fully formed, a sudden leap in human capability with few obvious precursors. This gap in the evidence fuels the first of our great enigmas. Was this a secret discovered once and then carried along trade routes by itinerant smiths? Or did different cultures stumble upon this earth-shattering secret independently? The simultaneous yet separate emergence of ironworking in West Africa, for instance, without any clear contact with the Hittites of the Near East, argues for the latter, making the accomplishment even more astounding. It suggests a universal human spark, an innate drive to master the elements that ignited in different corners of the world at around the same time. Faced with such a profound technological miracle, is it any wonder that ancient people looked for a supernatural explanation? The intricate process, from building the right clay furnace to creating the perfect charcoal fuel and achieving the precise airflow with bellows, seemed like a ritual. It is no coincidence that the gods of many pantheons were master blacksmiths. The Greeks had Hephaestus, who forged the weapons of the gods in his fiery workshop under a volcano. The Celts revered Goibniu, who not only crafted invincible spears but also presided over a feast that granted immortality. In Norse mythology, the dwarf brothers Brokkr and Eitri created Thor's mighty hammer Mjolnir. These were not just gods of craft, they were gods of creation itself. By attributing the secret of iron to divine beings, our ancestors were acknowledging the sheer wonder of the process. It was a power that felt gifted from above, not invented by mortals, and this belief directly translated into immense social standing for the first human smiths. They were the intermediaries between the community and the divine magic of transformation. They held the ultimate keys to power. The ability to produce superior weapons for warriors meant victory in battle, and the creation of more efficient tools like axes and plows meant greater agricultural surplus and prosperity. This knowledge was so valuable it was guarded with a secrecy that rivals modern state secrets. A master smith would have been incredibly careful about whom he taught, passing the sacred techniques only to a select few, often within his own family, over many years of apprenticeship. This clandestine nature of the craft means that the full extent of their original methods might be forever lost to us, leaving behind only the magnificent and sometimes baffling fruits of their labor for us to ponder. But if the discovery of ironworking felt like a miracle, then the figure of the blacksmith became its living prophet. Across the globe, almost without exception, the cultures that mastered iron did something remarkable. They wrapped the blacksmith in a cloak of divinity. This leads us directly to our second great mystery, the powerful and persistent myth of the divine smith. Why did societies so geographically and culturally disconnected all arrive at the same profound conclusion, that this craft was a gift from the gods? The Norse, for instance, believed that the most powerful artifacts of their gods, like Thor's hammer Mjolnir, were not divinely conjured but were painstakingly forged by the dwarf brothers Brokkr and Eitri in the fiery depths of their underground workshop. In West Africa, among the Yoruba people, the Orisha Ogun is both a god of war and the patron of all who work with iron and metal. He is a foundational figure, a creator who cleared the primordial forest with his iron tools, making civilization possible. The Celtic god Goibniu was a central figure in their myths, not only crafting weapons that never missed their mark, but also brewing a sacred ale that granted immortality to the Tuatha De Danann. And of course, the Greeks had Hephaestus, the limping god whose workshop under Mount Etna was a place of automated bellows and divine craftsmanship, creating everything from Achilles' armor to Pandora herself. This pattern is too consistent to be mere coincidence. It points to a deep-seated human response to the transformative power of the forge. Consider what an Iron Age community would have witnessed. A person would enter a soot-blackened hut, a place filled with roaring fire and unnatural heat. They would take a lump of unremarkable, earthy rock and, through a series of chants, rhythmic hammering, and the use of mysterious tools like bellows that breathed life into the flames, they would produce a gleaming, sharp, and incredibly strong object. From earth and fire came a plowshare that could tame the wilderness or a sword that could decide the fate of a battle. In a world where most processes were observable and understandable, planting a seed yielded a crop, weaving thread made cloth, the creation of metal was pure alchemy. It was a visible, tangible transformation that felt less like a technical process and more like a fundamental act of creation. Attributing this power to a god was a logical way to explain the unexplainable. It was an acknowledgement that humanity was touching a force greater than itself. However, there is another, more pragmatic layer to this mystery that we must consider. What if the propagation of these divine myths was not just a spontaneous cultural reaction, but also a brilliantly clever strategy employed by the smiths themselves? In an age without patents or intellectual property laws, how did you protect the most valuable knowledge in the world? You shrouded it in the sacred. By encouraging the belief that their skill was a divine gift, or even that they were descended from or directly channeling a god like Ogun or Hephaestus, a blacksmith created a powerful social shield. To anger a smith wasn't just to upset a craftsman, it was to risk the wrath of a deity. To demand his secrets was to commit sacrilege. This divine association elevated the smith from a simple laborer to a vital, untouchable pillar of the community. He became a figure you respected, feared, and richly rewarded. The myths, then, can be seen as a form of ancient occupational security, a narrative constructed to safeguard trade secrets that were the lifeblood of kingdoms. This deliberate blurring of the line between craftsman, magician, and god gave the blacksmith a unique autonomy and power. He moved in a space between the mundane and the mystical, and his workshop became a kind of sanctuary, a place where the ordinary rules of the world were suspended, and the very elements were bent to a human will that was believed to be touched by the divine. And that sacred space, the workshop between worlds, required a sacred material. But what if your land held no towering mountains rich with veins of hematite? What if you lived on the vast, flat plains of northern Europe, where the only treasures the earth offered were dense forests and seemingly endless, misty peat bogs? This geographical challenge gives rise to our third great mystery, the enigma of bog iron. For communities far from traditional ore sources, the ability to produce iron was nothing short of alchemy, and it began with knowing how to read the landscape in a way that bordered on the mystical. Bog iron is not a high-quality ore. It forms over centuries through a slow biological process. Rainwater, acidic from passing through layers of decaying plant matter in the bog, leaches tiny amounts of iron from the surrounding soil and bedrock. This iron-rich water then settles in the low-oxygen environment of the bog, where bacteria cause the iron to precipitate out, forming rusty, porous lumps just beneath the surface of the peat. To the untrained eye, it is just more rust-colored muck, but to an Iron-Age smith, it was a hidden treasure. The first layer of this mystery is the knowledge itself. How did they know where to look? It wasn't a matter of random digging. They understood that specific types of vegetation, like certain sedges and reeds, were indicators of the right chemical conditions below. They could recognize the particular color and consistency of the soil at the water's edge. This was a sophisticated understanding of biogeochemistry, gained not through formal science but through generations of accumulated, intimate observation passed down as oral tradition. Finding a viable deposit was like finding a secret map written in the language of nature. The harvesting process, known as iron winning, was backbreaking and eerie work. Wading into the cold, often chest-deep water of the bog, they would feel for these nodules with their feet or with long poles, then haul them up from the murky depths. The resulting ore was inferior, full of impurities like silica and phosphorus, and it yielded a much smaller amount of usable metal compared to mined ores. Yet it was a renewable resource. A bog could produce new nodules every few decades, making it a vital, sustainable source for local communities. This leads us to the deeper, more spiritual dimension of the mystery. Peat bogs were not considered ordinary places in the Iron Age mind. They were liminal spaces, thresholds between the world of the living and the world of the gods, spirits, and the dead. The water was dark and stagnant, the ground unstable and capable of swallowing objects, animals, and even people. preserving them for millennia in an uncanny state. Many of the most famous bog bodies, ritual sacrifices from the Iron Age, have been found in these exact environments. To enter a bog was to step into a sacred, dangerous realm. Therefore, the act of taking something from the bog, especially something as powerful as the seed of iron, could not have been a simple, mundane task. It is almost certain that it was accompanied by rituals or offerings to appease the spirits of the place. Perhaps a smith would whisper a prayer to a local deity or leave behind a valuable object, a piece of jewelry or a fine pot, as a trade for the ore he was removing. This practice transforms the acquisition of raw materials from a simple act of geology into a sacred transaction. The smith was not just a technician, he was a negotiator with the unseen world. The iron he pulled from the bog would have been imbued with this significance even before it reached the forge. It was a substance born of earth, water, and spirit, making the final object a sword or a sickle. Not just a tool, but a vessel of power, its origins rooted in a pact with the mysterious forces of the wetlands. This profound connection between practical necessity and spiritual belief perfectly illustrates how the blacksmith's craft was an inseparable blend of deep empirical knowledge and esoteric tradition, a duality that would become even more pronounced in the objects they created. Yet the sacred nature of the forge and the materials it consumed required more than just ritual. It demanded absolute discretion. If the knowledge of finding and transforming bog iron was power, then guarding that power became a matter of survival and status. This brings us to a particularly intriguing enigma, the possibility of a secret language of the smiths. Imagine the scene inside a bustling workshop, perhaps one serving a Roman legion on the edge of the empire. To an outside observer, the cacophony of hammers and the hiss of steam would be overwhelming. But listen more closely and you might notice something strange. The smiths and their apprentices seem to be communicating in a rapid-fire exchange of terms that sound nothing like the local dialect or even Latin. The words are short, guttural, perhaps reminiscent of the sounds of the forge itself. A Roman historian like Pliny the Elder might have noted this peculiarity, describing it as a kind of private tongue, unintelligible to any outsider who hadn't been initiated into the mysteries of the craft. This wasn't necessarily a fully developed language like Esperanto, but rather a thick, impenetrable jargon, a technical lexicon designed specifically for the forge. The need for such a code was practical. In a crowded marketplace or a military camp, discussing the specifics of your work in plain language was an invitation for rivals to steal your methods. How do you instruct an apprentice to bring the steel to the perfect temperature for quenching without saying the word quench aloud? You invent a term. The concept of temperature itself, invisible and critical, would have required a specialized vocabulary. They might not have had precise thermometers, but a master smith knew the subtlest shades of color in glowing metal, from a low, dull red to the vibrant, almost blinding yellow-white of welding heat. Each of these stages would have had a secret name. A cherry red might be called dragon's breath, while the color for folding steel might be swan's heart. The tools themselves, each an extension of the smith's will, would have had coded names. The tongs weren't just tongs, they were wolf's jaws. The anvil might have been the iron stone. The act of hammer welding different strips of metal together to create a stronger composite could have been referred to as braiding the hairs or the marriage of the irons. This specialized terminology served a dual purpose. On the most basic level, it was operational security. It protected the recipe for creating a superior sword or a more durable axe head. But on a deeper, more psychological level, this linguistic barrier was a powerful tool for building group identity. To understand the language of the smith was to be part of an exclusive club, a band of brothers and sometimes sisters bound by a sacred trust. An apprentice spending years in the workshop wouldn't just be learning how to swing a hammer, he would be slowly, painstakingly learning this vocabulary. Each term revealed was a step closer to full membership. This created a clear hierarchy within the craft, separating the masters who knew all the words from the journeymen who knew some, and the uninitiated who knew none. It reinforced the idea that blacksmithing wasn't a job you could just pick up. It was a wisdom you were granted access to, a truth that had to be earned. This linguistic wall made the smiths a tribe within a tribe, a community whose inner workings were as hidden and complex as the crystalline structure of the steel they produced. Their secret language was the verbal equivalent of the magical symbols they sometimes etched into their work, a declaration that this craft, and the people who practiced it, existed in a realm apart, halfway between the world of men and the domain of the gods whose names they might even whisper in their coded speech. Yet the secret language of the smiths, for all its power to conceal, was ultimately a means to an end. The true purpose of all that guarded knowledge, all that ritual and coded speech, was to produce objects of astonishing power and beauty. And perhaps no creation better represents this pinnacle of Iron Age artistry than the pattern-welded sword. Picture a blade emerging from the final polishing, its surface not a uniform gray, but alive with a mesmerizing, watery pattern of light and dark, swirling like smoke captured in metal. This was not mere decoration. This was the visual signature of a technological marvel, a masterpiece of engineering achieved centuries before the science of metallurgy could even begin to explain why it worked. To understand the mystery, we must first appreciate the monumental challenge these smiths faced. Iron, straight from the bloomery furnace, was often inconsistent. It could be too soft or too brittle or full of impurities. A smith's genius lay in his ability to overcome these flaws. The solution was pattern welding, a process of breathtaking complexity. It began by hammering out thin rods of iron, which was softer, and rods of steel, which was harder and contained more carbon. These rods were then bundled together, heated to a brilliant, incandescent yellow-white, and forged welded into a single, solid billet. This act of welding itself was a high-stakes feat. A single breath of air at the wrong moment could introduce impurities and ruin the bond, but the true artistry came next. The smith would then skillfully twist this composite billet, sometimes multiple times, creating a helical structure within the metal. This twisted bar might then be welded to another or to a hard steel edge, and the entire assembly was painstakingly hammered out into the final shape of the sword blade. After endless grinding, polishing, and finally etching with a mild acid like ferric chloride or even acidic fruit juice, the hidden pattern would be revealed. The acid would eat away at the softer iron more quickly than the harder steel, etching the ghost of the smith's twisting labor onto the surface of the blade, a permanent, swirling testament to the skill invested in its creation. The central enigma here is not just the technique's existence, but its perfection. How did these artisans, working with bellows and charcoal fires, without any understanding of carbon content or crystalline structures, manage to develop and consistently execute a process that is still respected by bladesmiths today? They couldn't see the molecular changes they were orchestrating. They operated on a level of pure empirical knowledge built over generations of trial and error. They understood through feel, sight, and sound what modern science would later confirm, that by laminating different types of metal together, they were creating a blade that combined the best properties of each. The softer iron core gave the sword flexibility and resilience, preventing it from snapping in the heat of battle, while the harder steel edges could be honed to a razor's sharpness. It was the ancient equivalent of modern composite materials. This leads to a deeper, more speculative layer of the mystery. Were these beautiful, sinuous patterns purely a happy accident of a practical technique, or did they carry a far greater significance? In a world where the smith was seen as a channel for supernatural forces, it is difficult to believe that such a visually striking effect was considered merely decorative. The patterns, flowing like serpents or river currents, would have been seen as evidence of the weapon's inherent spirit. Many cultures believed that a weapon was a living entity with its own will and power. The process of forging, with its fire, water, and hammer blows, was akin to a birth. The unique pattern on each blade, therefore, could have been viewed as its sole print, the physical manifestation of the smith's own spirit and skill woven directly into the metal. It was a mark of identity both for the weapon and its maker. A warrior wielding such a sword wouldn't just be carrying a tool. He would be holding a named artifact, a thing of power whose very appearance proclaimed its exceptional origin. The time, effort, and secret knowledge required to produce such a blade made it incredibly valuable, an heirloom fit for kings and chieftains. The pattern-welded sword, therefore, stands as the ultimate symbol of the Iron Age blacksmith's dual role. He was both a supremely talented engineer solving a material science problem, and a mystical artisan infusing his creations with a visible, tangible magic that resonated deeply with the beliefs of his time. But for all the protective power a master smith could weave into a blade, there was a chilling flip side to this belief. If a blacksmith could infuse an object with a piece of his own spirit or channel the favor of the gods, then what was to stop him from embedding a darker intention? This brings us to a more sinister enigma, one that echoes through the sagas and folklore of many cultures, the mystery of the cursed object, and specifically the cursed ring. The very skill that made a smith a revered figure also made him a potentially fearsome one, a person you would not want to cross. The epic poem Beowulf offers a haunting example. It describes a magnificent golden ring that is somehow cursed, bringing calamity and death to all who possess it. While the poem doesn't explicitly state that a smith made the curse, the implication is powerful. An object of such incredible craftsmanship, born from the forge, carries a destiny woven into its very metal. This idea finds a startling archaeological parallel far from the world of Germanic legend, in the Roman spa town of Bath in England. Here, archaeologists have discovered dozens of small, thin sheets of lead known as curse tablets. These were not official documents, they were desperate personal pleas to the gods. Individuals who felt they had been wronged, a stolen cloak, a personal betrayal, would scratch a message to the goddess Suli's Minerva onto the lead, then roll it up and throw it into the sacred spring, believing the goddess would enact their vengeance. What makes these curses so relevant to our mystery is the material itself. Lead was a metal worked by smiths, and the act of inscribing a curse onto a sheet of metal, giving a spoken wish a physical, permanent form, is strikingly similar to the smith's act of shaping intention into iron. Some of these tablets even invoke the forge directly, calling upon the divine fire to consume the wrongdoer. This creates a direct link between the transformative power of the smithy and the supernatural execution of justice or malice. So, were these curses a genuine, deeply held belief in the smith's ability to channel malevolent forces? In many cases, absolutely. The psychological power of a cursed object, especially one made by a person believed to have one foot in the spirit world, would have been immense. To receive a ring or a weapon from a smith you had cheated or insulted would be a terrifying prospect. Every misfortune that followed a failed harvest, an illness, a lost battle, could be attributed to the curse woven into the metal. This belief acted as a powerful social regulator, ensuring that clients treated the smith with the respect and payment he was due. Yet, we must also consider a more pragmatic, almost modern explanation. Could the rumor of a curse have been a brilliant, if ruthless, business strategy? Imagine a chieftain commissions an exquisite gold ring, a symbol of his power and wealth. The smith delivers a masterpiece, but the chieftain is slow to pay the agreed-upon price. A few weeks later, a whispered story begins to circulate in the longhouse that the smith, angered by the insult, put a curse on the ring. Soon after, the chieftain's favorite horse falls ill. The connection is instantly made. Fear would likely compel the chieftain to swiftly settle his debt, perhaps even with a bonus, in the hope that the smith would lift the curse. In this light, the smith's reputation as a master of mystical forces becomes a form of ancient insurance. It protected his livelihood by making the consequences of defaulting on a payment seem supernatural and dire. The curse was a tool that ensured the return of valuable items or guaranteed that the smith's work was properly compensated, leveraging fear to enforce a contract in a world without formal legal systems. This duality, the genuine belief in supernatural power existing alongside its clever exploitation, only deepens the mystery of the Iron Age blacksmith. He was a figure who could literally shape his own reality, using not just hammer and anvil, but the potent forces of psychology and belief to secure his place in a dangerous and unpredictable world. But if the power of the smith was often rooted to a specific, sacred place like a forge or a bog, our next mystery compels us to look to the road, for not all masters of metal were stationary. Some chose or were perhaps forced into a life of constant movement, becoming the enigmatic wandering smiths whose very existence was a paradox. How could someone practice a craft that required a heavy anvil, a permanent furnace, and vast amounts of charcoal while remaining perpetually on the move? The answer lies with specialized, highly secretive clans who turned this logistical nightmare into a way of life. Across continents, from the itinerant tinkers of Celtic Europe to the Haya smelters of Tanzania, we find evidence of nomadic or semi-nomadic smith tribes. These groups were the quintessential outsiders, moving like shadows between settled communities, their arrival both anticipated and viewed with deep suspicion. The mystery of their origins is profound. Were these the descendants of master smiths displaced by war or famine, taking their invaluable skills on the road as a means of survival? Or were they from cultures where smithing was not just a profession but an entire ethnic or clan identity, a birthright that demanded mobility to serve a wide network of clients? The Haya people of Tanzania present a fascinating case. Their advanced method of preheating air for their furnaces allowed them to achieve steel-making temperatures over 300 years before similar technology appeared in Europe. Yet they were not a centralized empire. They were a society organized around skilled clans who may have moved to where the resources and demand were greatest. In Europe, groups like the Irish travelers, often historically referred to as tinkers, carried the tradition of mobile metalwork for centuries. They would arrive in a village with their tools, set up a temporary forge, and repair everything from pots to plowshares before packing up and disappearing to the next settlement. Their entire existence was built around portable anvils, compact bellows, and the knowledge of how to build a quick, efficient clay furnace that could be abandoned without a second thought. This transient nature created a puzzling social dynamic. A settled village was utterly dependent on these visitors. They brought the only means of repairing essential tools and creating new metal goods. This created a relationship of uneasy symbiosis. The villagers needed the smith's skills, but they also feared them. The wandering smiths existed outside the normal social structures of the community. They had no land, no fixed allegiance, and were not bound by local laws or customs in the same way. Their secret knowledge and closed, clan-based society made them appear alien and potentially dangerous. They were often attributed with magical powers, not just as smiths, but as fortune tellers or healers, further cementing their status as people who operated beyond the boundaries of the ordinary world. This reverence was always tempered with prejudice. They were considered unclean or untrustworthy, their mobility seen as a sign of shiftlessness rather than professionalism. This paradox, being simultaneously revered for their power and reviled for their difference, is a central part of their enigmatic legacy. Perhaps the greatest puzzle they leave for archaeologists is their near invisibility. A nomadic people leave a faint footprint on the landscape. They do not build permanent stone forges that stand for millennia. Their settlements are temporary, their hearths simple and quickly scattered. The material evidence of their passing might be nothing more than a scatter of charcoal, a few flakes of iron slag, and perhaps a lost tool or two. This lack of a substantial archaeological record makes tracing their routes and understanding the full scope of their knowledge incredibly difficult. The secrets they guarded so closely, the specific recipes for their alloys, the precise designs of their portable furnaces, the oral histories of their origins, often vanished with them when their way of life faded away. The wandering smiths thus represent a double mystery. They were masters of a stationary craft who defied convention by choosing motion, and they were vital cogs in the machinery of Iron Age society who deliberately left almost no trace of their passage, ensuring their stories would remain as elusive as smoke from a temporary fire. Moving from the solitary roads of the wandering smith, we now turn our gaze upward to the stars themselves. The eighth mystery posits a connection so profound it challenges our view of the blacksmith as a purely practical figure. What if the placement of the forge was not a matter of simple convenience, but a deliberate act of cosmic alignment? This is the theory of the astronomical forge, a controversial idea that suggests the transformative power of the smithy was consciously linked to the grand cycles of the heavens. The most compelling and debated evidence for this comes from specific archaeological sites where the orientation of metalworking areas seems to correspond with celestial events. One of the most studied examples is Danebury Hill Fort in England, an Iron Age stronghold bustling with activity. Here, excavations revealed that certain workshops were not randomly situated. Their entrances, or the alignment of the hearths within, appear to have been deliberately positioned to catch the first rays of the sun on the summer solstice, the longest day of the year. This cannot be easily dismissed as coincidence. It implies a purposeful design, an architectural decision that connected the dark, earthy work of the smith with the most powerful solar event of the annual cycle. To understand why this connection would be made, we need to step into the worldview of an Iron Age community. The sun was not merely a source of light and warmth, it was the ultimate agent of transformation in the natural world. Its journey across the sky dictated the seasons, governed the growth of crops, and ensured the very survival of the tribe. Its light banished the chaos of darkness, and its heat could bake clay into pottery and dry meat for preservation. The sun was in essence a celestial fire, a divine force of creation and order. Now consider the forge. Within its confined space, the blacksmith wielded a miniature, controllable sun. His furnace glowed with a similar, intense heat, a fire capable of transforming the raw materials of the earth, ore and stone, into a new, refined state of being. The parallel would have been unmistakable. By aligning his workspace with the solstice sun, the smith was performing a powerful act of sympathetic magic. He was harnessing the peak energy of the celestial fire to amplify the power of his own earthly fire. It was a ritual designed to draw the sun's vitality directly into the metal, infusing the sword or plowshare with the strength and permanence of the cosmos itself. This practice elevates metalworking from a craft to a cosmological ritual, where the smith acts as a priest mediating between the powers of the sky and the resources of the earth. This symbolic connection finds echoes in the myths we've already explored. Many gods of the forge, like the Greek Hephaestus, are also associated with fire in its broadest sense. But the link goes deeper. In Norse mythology, the sun and moon are chased across the sky by wolves, a myth cycle of perpetual renewal that echoes the cyclical nature of heating, hammering, and cooling metal. The idea that the forge fire was a microcosm of the solar fire suggests a sophisticated, unified understanding of the universe, where the same fundamental principles operated on both a grand and a human scale. The blacksmith, in this light, was not just working with iron, he was participating in a cosmic dance, synchronizing his creative acts with the rhythm of the heavens. The metal he produced was therefore more than a simple object. It was a tangible piece of cosmic order, a sliver of the sun's power made solid and given form for the benefit of the community. This profound integration of astronomy, spirituality, and technology reveals a dimension of Iron Age ingenuity that we are only beginning to appreciate, suggesting that their knowledge was not just practical but deeply philosophical. Yet the astronomical alignment of a forge, a practice connecting the smith's work to the grand cycles of the cosmos, represents only one facet of their profound relationship with the spiritual world. A far more tangible and far more puzzling manifestation of this connection lies in the deliberate and permanent retirement of the tools of the trade themselves. We now confront a mystery hidden not in the alignment of a workshop, but in the silent, dark waters of a peat bog or the sacred ground of a burial mound, the enigmatic practice of the sacrificial anvil. Across northern Europe, from Denmark to the British Isles, archaeologists have made a series of startling discoveries. They have unearthed the most vital instruments of a blacksmith's livelihood: anvils, hammers, tongs, and files, not discarded as trash, but placed with clear intention in locations of great ritual significance. These were not lost items, they were votive offerings, gifts to the gods, carefully deposited in places from which they were never meant to be retrieved. One of the most powerful examples of this practice comes from the Hjortspring boat sacrifice on the island of Als in Denmark. Dating to around 300 years before the Common Era, this was not merely the deposition of a few tools, it was the ritual destruction of an entire warrior party's equipment. A large wooden boat was filled with the weapons and gear of a defeated enemy: swords, spears, shields, and chainmail. But nestled amongst this arsenal of war were the very tools used to create it: blacksmithing hammers and anvils. This was a comprehensive offering, a symbolic returning of both the products of the forge and the means of their production to the divine. The act of placing these heavy, valuable iron objects into a bog or lake would have been a significant, deliberate undertaking. It meant a community was willingly surrendering immense practical wealth and a source of its power. This was not a casual decision, which makes the reasons behind it all the more compelling to unravel. So why would a society sacrifice such essential technology? One compelling theory points to an act of profound gratitude or a plea for future favor. If a smith had just produced a legendary sword that brought victory in a crucial battle, or if a community had prospered from a particularly bountiful season of tool making, offering the anvil itself could be seen as the ultimate thank you to a god like Odin or Thor, or a local deity of craft. It was a way of acknowledging that the skill came from a divine source and returning the instrument of that skill to its origin, thereby ensuring continued goodwill and future success. The offering was a sacred contract, a trade of a tangible object for intangible divine blessing. However, a more complex and slightly darker interpretation suggests these acts might have been a form of ritual killing. An anvil was not an inanimate object in the Iron Age worldview. It had a spirit, a life force accrued through years of service. Every hammer blow it endured, every piece of metal it shaped, imbued it with power. But what happens when an anvil cracks or a hammer becomes too worn to use? Its useful life is over, but its spiritual energy remains. Simply throwing a powerful object like this onto a scrap heap would be incredibly dangerous, like abandoning a potent spirit. The proper, safe way to decommission it was through a formal ritual of deposition in a sacred place like a bog, which acted as a gateway to the other world. By sacrificing the tool, the community was respectfully retiring its spirit, laying it to rest in the custody of the gods and preventing any malevolent energy from being unleashed. This transforms the act from a simple offering into a necessary piece of spiritual hygiene, a way of managing the metaphysical consequences of their own technology. The Hjortspring find adds another chilling layer to this mystery: the context of war. The deposition of smithing tools alongside the weapons of a defeated army suggests a third, more strategic reason. By offering the enemy's means of production, their anvils and hammers, the victors were not just celebrating a battle won, they were attempting to secure a permanent victory. They were symbolically destroying the enemy's capacity to ever re-arm themselves. It was an act of magical disarmament, ensuring that even the spirit of the foe's craftsmanship was drowned and rendered inert in the sacred bog, forever preventing them from forging new weapons for revenge. This practice reveals a belief in the holistic nature of power, where destroying the physical tools was just as important as defeating the warriors who wielded their products. The sacrificial anvil, therefore, stands as a silent testament to a world where the boundary between the workshop and the temple was utterly blurred, and where the tools that built civilization were considered powerful enough to be worthy of the most profound sacrifices. But this profound connection to the spirit world, demonstrated through cosmic alignment and sacred sacrifice, may have manifested in the smith himself in the most startling way of all. Our 10th mystery explores one of the most persistent and eerie threads of folklore surrounding these masters of metal, the belief that they possessed the power of shape-shifting. Across the Celtic and Germanic worlds, tales abound of blacksmiths who could shed their human form, taking on the visage of a wolf, a bear, or other powerful animals. This was not merely a spooky story told around the fire. It points to a deep-seated association between the smith's craft and the ancient shamanic traditions that permeated Iron Age spirituality, where the ability to traverse the boundary between human and animal was the mark of a truly powerful spiritual intermediary. To understand this, we must first look at the role of the shaman. In many ancient cultures, the shaman was a vital figure who could journey into the spirit world to seek knowledge, heal the sick, or divine the future. A core aspect of this journey was transformation. By wearing animal skins, masks, or through trance states, the shaman was believed to literally become an animal, a wolf to gain its cunning and ferocity, a bear for its immense strength, or a bird to fly to the upper world. This shapeshifting was a sign of ultimate spiritual power, a breaking of the natural order that proved the shaman's connection to forces beyond ordinary human perception. Now consider the blacksmith's daily reality. His work was a constant, visible act of transformation. He took the most mundane of materials, lumps of earth like ore, and through a dramatic process of fire, water, and force, he gave it a new, superior life as a sharp, gleaming object. He was, in a very real sense, a master of alchemy long before the word existed. This daily demonstration of transformative power would have naturally led people to wonder, if he can perform such miracles on dead matter, what other transformations might he be capable of? The leap in logic, while vast to our modern minds, would have felt smaller in a world where everything was imbued with spirit. The smith's ability to change the essence of metal suggested he might also have the power to change his own essence. The forge itself was a place of metamorphosis, a cavern of heat and shadow that existed between worlds, much like the shaman's sacred grove or ritual space. Within its flickering light, the smith's appearance would change dramatically. His face, covered in soot and glowing from the fire's heat, could look demonic or otherworldly. His strong, muscular arms, constantly moving in a rhythmic, almost primal dance with the hammer, evoked the power of a bear. The sounds of the workshop, the sharp, percussive hammer blows, the growling of the bellows, the hiss of steam, created a soundscape that was far removed from the normal sounds of village life. It was a place of sensory overload where the ordinary rules seemed suspended. In this environment, was it so difficult for a visitor to believe they had glimpsed the smith's form flicker, for just a moment, into something more bestial? This folklore also served a potent social function. The fear of a smith who could become a wolf by night acted as a powerful deterrent against crossing him. It was the ultimate enforcement of the social contract we discussed earlier. If you failed to pay for a sword, you weren't just angering a craftsman. You were risking an encounter with a predatory creature in the dark forest. This belief granted the smith a form of protection and autonomy that was crucial for someone holding such valuable, dangerous knowledge. It was a reputation that, whether entirely believed or subtly encouraged, gave him a fearsome authority. The smith as shapeshifter represents the final, complete blurring of the line between the human and the supernatural. He was not just a person who worked with magical forces. He was a being who could himself become magic, embodying the raw, untamed power of the natural world that he so expertly harnessed within the confines of his workshop. This intimate connection between the smith's transformative power and the spiritual world leads us to two of the most acoustically fascinating mysteries: the ghost in the metal and the legend of the singing sword. Both revolve around the idea that the objects born from the forge were not silent, inert tools, but living entities with their own voices. The first concept, that of the ghost in the metal, stems from a fundamentally animistic worldview. For many Iron Age peoples, the entire universe was alive with spirit. Rivers, trees, stones, and even the wind possessed a consciousness. So why would metal, born from the sacred fire and the earth's raw ore, be any different? The belief was that during the violent, fiery birth of the bloom in the smelting furnace, a spirit could be captured and fused within the metal itself. This spirit might be a benevolent ancestor whose wisdom and strength would then guide the hand of the warrior wielding the finished sword. Or, more ominously, it could be a nature deity from the location where the ore was mined, or even a malevolent force drawn to the intensity of the ritual. The smelting process was not just a chemical reaction, it was a metaphysical event. The roaring furnace, the chanting, the offerings, all of it created a vortex of spiritual energy where the boundary between the physical and the unseen worlds was thin. The resulting iron bloom was therefore not just a lump of metal, it was a vessel, a new home for a captured consciousness. This belief gave every object a unique personality and history before it was even shaped by the smith's hammer. A plowshare made from ore taken from a peaceful, sun-drenched hillside might be considered lucky, ensuring a good harvest, but a sword forged from bog iron, pulled from the depths of a spiritually charged wetland, might be considered unpredictable, powerful, and potentially dangerous, carrying the capricious nature of the bog spirits within it. This leads us directly to the second, more audible mystery, the phenomenon of the singing sword. We've all heard the iconic shiing sound of a sword being drawn in a movie, but in reality, a well-made blade can produce a remarkable variety of sounds. When struck or even when swung through the air with force, certain swords emit a clear, high-pitched, sustained ring, a resonant hum that can last for several seconds. This wasn't just a random noise. To the Iron Age ear, it was the voice of the spirit trapped inside. The specific sound a blade made was loaded with meaning. A clear, pure, musical tone was interpreted as the spirit within expressing its approval, its readiness for battle, or its high-quality nature. It was a sign that the smith had successfully married the materials and the spirit, creating a harmonious and potent weapon. This sound was its battle cry, a declaration of its presence and power. Conversely, a dull thud, a short, deadened ring, or worse, a discordant buzz could be a sign of poor craftsmanship, a fatal flaw in the metal, or, more terrifyingly, the displeasure of a trapped and angry spirit. A sword that sounded wrong was considered unlucky, even cursed. A warrior might believe it would fail him at a critical moment or even turn against him. The actual cause of the singing is a brilliant convergence of physics and ancient craftsmanship. The sound is a product of the blade's natural frequency of vibration, which is determined by its exact dimensions, shape, and the internal structure of the metal. A pattern-welded sword with its complex, laminated layers of different steel and iron has a particularly complex internal structure. This complexity can create a unique and rich acoustic signature, a distinctive voice that would have been as identifiable as a fingerprint. Even minor damage, like a small crack or a bend, would dramatically alter this frequency, changing the sword's ring into something new and potentially ominous. The smiths, though they lacked the scientific vocabulary, understood this relationship between structure and sound intimately. They would tap a finished blade lightly with a hammer and listen carefully, not just for flaws but for the right note. It was a final quality control test far more sophisticated than simple visual inspection. In a very real sense, they were tuning the sword like a musical instrument, ensuring its voice was true. This practice blurs the line between blacksmith and luthier, between weapon maker and spirit whisperer. The singing sword was the ultimate proof of the object's aliveness. Its voice was the audible proof of the ghost within, a permanent conversation between the warrior, his weapon, and the unseen world that gave it power. Every time the blade rang out, it was a reminder that the wielder was not alone. He held in his hand a partner forged in fire and spirit. But as we marvel at the philosophical idea of a spirit trapped within the metal, we are confronted by a mystery that is breathtakingly physical and enduring, a monument that has literally stood the test of time. Standing in the Decode complex in Delhi, India, is a testament to metallurgical genius that defies all conventional understanding, the Iron Pillar of Delhi. This is not a small artifact tucked away in a museum case. It is a towering column of wrought iron over 7 meters tall and weighing more than 6 tons that has been exposed to the elements for an estimated 1,600 years. And yet, despite the monsoon rains, the humid air, and the passage of centuries, it shows almost no sign of rust. This isn't just a curiosity. It is an engineering puzzle that has fascinated and frustrated scientists for generations, representing a level of technological sophistication that seems to belong to a much later age. The pillar was erected during the height of the Gupta Empire, around the year 400 of the Common Era, and an inscription suggests it was originally dedicated to the Hindu god Vishnu. The sheer scale of its creation is the first part of the mystery. Forging such a massive, single piece of iron was a staggering feat in itself, requiring a level of coordination and furnace technology that was unparalleled at the time. But the real enigma is its pristine condition. Modern wrought iron, left outside in a similar climate, would be a crumbling mass of reddish-brown corrosion within a few decades. So what is the secret of the Delhi pillar? For a long time, the most popular theory pointed to its specific chemical composition. Analysis has shown that the iron has an unusually high phosphorus content and a relatively low sulfur and manganese content. The theory goes that the phosphorus, combined with the iron and oxygen, helped form a thin, invisible, and protective layer of a compound called mesawite on the surface. This passive layer acts as a shield, preventing oxygen and moisture from reaching the pure metal underneath, and thus stopping the corrosion process before it can really begin. This explanation, however, is not the final word. The mystery deepens when we ask whether this was a deliberate achievement or an incredibly fortunate accident. Did Gupta-era blacksmiths intentionally seek out ores with high phosphorus content, understanding through generations of trial and error that it produced a more durable metal? Or was the specific ore used for the pillar simply unique, and its resistance a happy coincidence that the smiths themselves may not have fully understood? The debate is fierce. Some researchers argue that the consistent quality of the pillar suggests a deliberate process, a lost technique of phosphoric iron production. Others counter that if it was a known and controlled technique, we would find many more such rust-resistant artifacts from the same period, but we do not. The pillar stands largely alone, a magnificent anomaly. This leads us to our 14th mystery, which broadens the scope beyond India. The Iron Pillar is the most famous example, but it is not entirely unique. Across Europe and Asia, archaeologists have uncovered a handful of other ancient iron objects that display a surprising, though often less complete, resistance to corrosion. Certain Celtic artifacts, for instance, and some weapon fragments from Central Asia, show a similar pattern of a thin, protective layer that has slowed their decay. This suggests that the phenomenon might be more widespread, a hidden thread of advanced metallurgical knowledge that appeared in different times and places. In some cases, the resistance can be traced to specific impurities in the ore, much like the Delhi pillar, but in others, the cause is less clear. Could some smiths have developed a lost technique for surface treatment, perhaps a method of applying a special glaze or a process of repeated heating and cooling in a particular atmosphere that altered the surface chemistry of the metal, creating an artificial passive layer? There are even tantalizing hints from ancient texts describing rituals or recipes for treating iron that sound less like magic and more like practical, chemical instructions that have since been lost or misinterpreted. The existence of these lesser-known artifacts forces us to reconsider the capabilities of Iron Age blacksmiths. Were they merely skilled artisans, or were some of them proto-chemists operating with a deep, if intuitive, understanding of material science? The line between a fortunate accident and deliberate innovation is blurry. A smith might notice that iron from a particular mine lasted longer. He wouldn't know about phosphorus, but he would know it was better iron. He would then guard the source of that ore or the specific way he worked it as a trade secret. Over generations, this empirical knowledge, passed down without a scientific framework, could have resulted in the production of objects that seemed to defy the natural laws of decay. The true mystery, then, may not be a single lost recipe, but the loss of an entire mindset, a way of observing, experimenting, and preserving practical knowledge that allowed these ancient masters to achieve results we are still struggling to explain with all the tools of modern science. These rust-resistant artifacts stand as silent, stubborn challenges to our timeline of technological progress, suggesting that the fire of the Iron Age forge may have burned with a brighter, more sophisticated light than we have ever given it credit for. Yet this power to create objects of immense strength and beauty stands in stark contrast to one of the most perplexing and deeply personal mysteries surrounding the blacksmith: the persistent folklore of the infertility curse. Across numerous cultures, from the Celtic lands of Europe to various African traditions, a strange and saddening belief persists that the very men who mastered the art of creation in the forge were often unable to create life of their own. Stories and taboos suggest that blacksmiths and their families were cursed with barrenness, their lineage dying out despite their vital role in the community. This presents a profound paradox. The master creator of tools, weapons, and art, the shaper of the world's very substance, was somehow seen as hindered in the most fundamental act of human creation. Why would such a contradictory belief take root? One compelling explanation lies in the realm of symbolic balance. In many ancient worldviews, power was not infinite, it was a kind of equilibrium. If a person possessed an extraordinary amount of power in one area, it was believed they might lack it in another. The smith's creative energy was so intensely focused on the inorganic world of metal and fire that it was thought to drain his potency for biological creation. His life force was seen as being poured entirely into the forge, leaving little for the hearth and home. This idea reflects a deep-seated human tendency to see the world in terms of complementary opposites, where an excess in one domain necessitates a deficiency in another. A more pragmatic and perhaps more chilling theory points to the very real physical dangers of the profession. We now understand that prolonged exposure to heavy metals like lead and the fumes from certain ores can have severe effects on reproductive health. While Iron Age people had no concept of toxins or sperm count, they were excellent observers of patterns. If they noticed that families in smithing lineages often had fewer children or experienced more miscarriages and stillbirths, they would have sought an explanation. Without the framework of modern medicine, the most logical conclusion within their understanding was that a spiritual curse was at work, a supernatural price paid for wielding such transformative power. The curse, then, may have been a folk interpretation of a very real occupational hazard, a way of making sense of a tragic pattern they could observe but not scientifically explain. Ultimately, this duality of creation and taboo speaks volumes about the complex social position of the blacksmith. The infertility curse can be interpreted as a narrative created by the community to manage the anxiety provoked by the smith's power. By believing that this power came with a great personal cost, ordinary people could psychologically balance the scales. The smith might be a near-divine figure, but he was also a tragic one, his mastery over the material world offset by a lack in the personal realm. This made him less threatening, more human, and his immense skill something to be pitied as much as it was revered. It was a way for society to temper the awe he inspired, embedding a cautionary tale within his legend. The mysteries of the forge as a womb and the smith's potential infertility are two sides of the same coin, representing the immense creative power these individuals held and the profound, often contradictory, ways in which human societies choose to understand and regulate that power. If the power of the forge was believed to be a cosmic force, then it stands to reason that its masters would have been deeply intertwined with the other great sources of wisdom in Iron Age society. This brings us to one of the most tantalizing historical puzzles, the potential link between the blacksmith and the druid in Celtic cultures. The classical writers who describe the druids, like Julius Caesar, placed them at the absolute pinnacle of the learned class. They were judges, historians, philosophers, and intermediaries with the gods. They were the keepers of the oral tradition, and their training could reportedly take 20 years. What is fascinating and less commonly discussed is that these same sources sometimes hint that the Druidic order was not a monolithic priesthood, but a broader intellectual class that may have included other skilled professionals, particularly those who worked with the sacred elements of earth and fire. The blacksmith, with his transformative power and his access to the spirit world through metal, is a prime candidate for such an affiliation. While direct archaeological proof is elusive, the Druids left no written records of their own. The circumstantial evidence is compelling. Consider the significance of the materials the smith worked with. Iron ore came from the earth, a realm sacred to the Celts, often associated with deities and ancestors. The fire of the forge represented transformation and purification. Water was used for quenching, and air was vital for the bellows. The smith was a master of all four classical elements, manipulating them in a way that no one else could. This holistic command of the natural world would have been of profound interest to the Druids, who were themselves natural philosophers seeking to understand the universe's fundamental principles. It is not difficult to imagine a scenario where a highly skilled smith, perhaps from a long lineage of masters, would be considered part of this learned class, his technical knowledge viewed as a form of sacred wisdom. He wouldn't necessarily be a druid who performed public rituals, but rather a specialist within the broader intellectual sphere, his workshop serving as a practical laboratory where cosmological principles were made manifest. The creation of a king's sword or a tribe's sacred cauldron was as much a ritual act as it was a technical one, an event that would have required the blessing and perhaps the direct participation of the Druids, blurring the lines between their roles entirely. This fusion of craft and ceremony leads us directly to the tools themselves and our next mystery, the existence of magical tools. We must move beyond the idea that every hammer and tong in a smithy was designed solely for pounding metal. Archaeological finds across Celtic Europe suggest that some tools were crafted for a purpose that transcended the mundane. These are not the heavily worn, battered implements of daily labor. Instead, we find exquisitely made items, sometimes miniature in size, fashioned from bronze or iron but adorned with intricate designs, inlays of precious metal or symbolic carvings. A pair of tongs might feature terminals shaped like animal heads, wolves, or birds of prey creatures with strong spiritual associations. A hammerhead could be incised with solar symbols or spirals, patterns that have no practical function for gripping but immense significance for channeling spiritual power. These objects were likely never intended to touch hot iron. Their fine craftsmanship and symbolic decoration point to a ritual function. They were probably used in ceremonies that sanctified the work of the forge, perhaps being used to make a symbolic first strike on a new anvil or to ceremonially grip a finished sword before it was presented to a chieftain. In the hands of a druid or a ritual specialist smith, these tools became conduits for invoking divine favor. The act of forging was, as we've seen, a magical process. It would make perfect sense that the process had its own dedicated ritual instruments. Using a special, sacred hammer to tap a newly cast ceremonial torque might have been believed to lock the blessings of the gods into the metal itself. This practice separates the profoundly sacred act of creation from the everyday repair of a plowshare, elevating the smith's role to that of a priest when the occasion demanded. These magical tools are a physical testament to the idea that the forge was as much a temple as a workshop, and its master needed the appropriate sacred vessels to perform his highest duties. The most powerful evidence for this sacred dimension, however, comes from the discovery of what archaeologists term ritual hammers. These are distinct from both everyday tools and finely decorated ceremonial objects. They are often found in contexts of ultimate significance, placed carefully in the graves of high-status individuals or deposited in hoards of valuable items meant as offerings to the gods. The defining characteristic of these hammers is their state. Many are pristine, showing no signs of wear on their striking faces, indicating they were never used for practical work. Others have been deliberately and symbolically killed, bent, broken, or twisted in a way that renders them useless for smithing, but perfect for ritual. A ritually killed hammer deposited in a bog alongside swords and cauldrons sends a powerful message. It is not merely an offering of a valuable object, it is the sacrifice of the very concept of creation. By breaking the tool, the community is symbolically offering the power of the smith itself to the deities, perhaps in a time of crisis or as part of a profound treaty with the other world. When such a hammer is placed in a chieftain's grave, the symbolism is equally profound. It suggests that the authority to rule was intrinsically linked to the power to create and control the technology that defined the age. The chieftain may not have been a smith himself, but by being buried with the symbol of the craft, a ritual hammer, he was taking that creative and destructive power with him into the afterlife, asserting his rightful authority among the ancestors and gods. This practice transforms the hammer from a simple tool into a symbol of sovereignty, a direct link between the mastery of metal and the legitimacy of leadership. Together, the Druid-Smith connection, the magical tools, and the ritual hammers paint a picture of a society where technological prowess and spiritual belief were not separate spheres, but were woven together into a single, powerful tapestry of meaning, where the ring of the hammer was both a sound of industry and a prayer. Yet for all the symbolic power of ritual hammers and sacred tools, the true legacy of the Iron Age blacksmith was forged in the very molecular structure of the metal itself. This brings us to a triad of interconnected mysteries that represent the absolute pinnacle of their craft: the controlled production of steel, the alchemy of quenching, and the legend of Damascus steel. At its heart lies a fundamental puzzle. How did cultures with no knowledge of chemistry or metallurgy consistently create a material far superior to simple iron? Steel is essentially iron that has been intentionally infused with a small, precise amount of carbon. This seemingly minor addition transforms the metal, making it harder, stronger, and capable of holding a much sharper edge. The challenge was one of incredible precision. Too little carbon and you have soft, malleable iron, useless for a weapon. Too much carbon and the metal becomes brittle like cast iron, shattering on impact. Iron Age smiths had to navigate this narrow window of perfection blindly, guided only by centuries of accumulated sensory knowledge. The process likely began at the very source, the bloomery furnace. Certain types of ore or specific methods of managing the charcoal fuel and airflow could naturally produce a bloom with a higher carbon content, a kind of primitive steel right from the start. Smiths would have learned to recognize these sweet spots through trial and error, perhaps noting that ore from a particular part of a mine or charcoal made from a specific type of wood yielded a stronger final product. But the real artistry came after, in a technique known as carburization. This involved taking a finished iron object and literally baking it in a carbon-rich environment for hours or even days. The object would be packed in charcoal inside a sealed clay container and heated. At these high temperatures, carbon atoms from the charcoal would slowly diffuse into the surface of the iron, converting the outer layer into steel. This created a composite material, a tough iron core with a hard, wear-resistant steel shell, a perfect combination for a tool or weapon. The mystery is in the consistency. Without thermometers or timers, how did they know when to stop? They were likely reading the fire, watching for subtle color changes in the container itself, or even judging by the passage of time measured in sunrises. This was metallurgy by intuition, a secret recipe passed down through generations, its success dependent on the master's feel for the process rather than any written formula. But creating a steel edge was only half the battle. The true magic, the moment that must have seemed most like a supernatural transformation, was the quenching process. This was the heart of the mystery, a high-stakes ritual where a blade's destiny was sealed in an instant. The act itself is dramatic, pulling a blade glowing a brilliant orange-yellow from the forge and plunging it directly into a waiting liquid. The result is a violent, sizzling eruption of steam, and the emergence of a blade that is now incredibly hard. The science behind it involves rapidly cooling the hot steel, which locks its crystal structure into an extremely hard form called martensite. But for the Iron Age smith, this was a moment of tremendous risk. Quench too quickly, typically in water, and the blade becomes as hard as glass but also just as brittle, prone to cracking or snapping. Quench too slowly, and the blade remains soft and unable to hold an edge. The secret, then, lay in the choice of quenching medium and the precise temperature of the metal at the moment of immersion. This is where folklore and practical science become inseparable. What liquids did these master smiths use? Pure water was common but risky. Many traditions speak of using brine salt water, which cools the metal slightly less abruptly, reducing the chance of cracking. Other accounts, from the legends of the Vikings to the smiths of Japan, mention the use of oil, which cools the steel even more gradually, producing a tough, resilient blade. Then there are the more esoteric recipes, the true secrets that were guarded fiercely. Some legends speak of quenching in the urine of a red-haired boy or the blood of a powerful animal. While this sounds purely mythological, there may be a kernel of practical truth hidden within. The chemical composition of urine, for instance, is different from plain water and could have produced a slightly different cooling effect that some smiths found superior. More importantly, these rituals served a psychological purpose. By attributing the success of the quench to a secret, almost magical ingredient, the smith further shrouded his craft in mystery. It wasn't just about temperature, it was about capturing a vital essence, a spirit from the quenching liquid itself, and transferring it into the metal. The act of quenching was therefore both a precise technical procedure and a powerful ceremony, where the smith's skill, his secret knowledge, and a touch of the supernatural combined to birth a weapon of legend. And no weapon is more legendary than Damascus steel. This name, given by crusaders who encountered it in the Middle East, refers to blades renowned for their incredible sharpness, their ability to bend without breaking, and their most distinctive feature, a beautiful, wavy, watery pattern on their surface like frozen silk. The mystery of Damascus steel is a tragedy of lost knowledge. We know the raw material, known as woot steel, originated in India and Sri Lanka. It was produced in small, crucible furnaces that created a high-carbon steel ingot with a unique internal crystalline structure. These ingots were then traded to smiths in places like Damascus, who possessed the secret knowledge of how to forge them into blades. The process involved heating and hammering the ingot at a very specific, lower temperature. If heated too high, the unique carbon structure would be lost and the pattern would vanish. The smiths of Damascus had perfected this delicate thermal dance, but the exact technique was never written down. It was an art passed from master to apprentice, and when the trade routes were disrupted and the workshops eventually declined, the secret died with the last masters. For centuries, the method was lost, and modern attempts to recreate it have only been partially successful. The legend of Damascus steel, therefore, stands as the ultimate symbol of the Iron Age blacksmith's genius, a mastery of material so profound that even with all our advanced technology, we still cannot fully replicate the achievements of those ancient artisans who worked by fire, feel, and a legacy of closely guarded secrets. But this power to command the elements and even the favor of the gods did not guarantee a uniform place of honor. The social standing of the Iron Age blacksmith was a labyrinth of contradictions, a puzzle that changes dramatically depending on where and when we look. This brings us to a trio of interconnected mysteries that reveal the blacksmith not as a single archetype, but as a chameleon-like figure whose status was as malleable as the metal he worked. We must explore the paradox of the revered royal armorer, the shunned social pariah, and the ultimate fusion of these roles in the legendary Smith King. First, consider the mystery of the social pariah. In numerous cultures, from parts of ancient India to certain tribes in Africa, and even in the fringes of Celtic Europe, the blacksmith was an outcast. He was often forced to live on the literal outskirts of the village, and his touch could be considered polluting. This seems utterly illogical for someone so vital to the community's survival. The reasons for this ostracism are as complex as they are fascinating. One powerful factor was the smith's intimate association with death. He crafted the spears and swords that killed in battle. He was, in a very real sense, an architect of mortality. In societies with strong taboos around death, this connection could make him spiritually dangerous, a person permanently stained by the indirect consequences of his craft. Furthermore, his work itself was seen as a violation of natural order. He ripped metal from the earth's womb and subjected it to a violent, fiery transformation. This was a profound act of manipulation that, while beneficial, could also be viewed as unsettling or unholy, setting him apart from those who engaged in more natural pursuits like farming or herding. This status as an outsider was often compounded by the physical reality of his work. The forge was a dirty, soot-filled place. The smith was perpetually covered in grime, charcoal dust, and the metallic smell of his trade. In cultures that placed a high value on ritual purity and cleanliness, this alone could be enough to mark him as unclean. Yet, this very isolation also reinforced his power. Living on the edge of the community made him and his secrets less accessible. His separateness enhanced his aura of mystery, making him seem less human and more like a force of nature, a figure you needed, perhaps feared, but did not fully welcome. The pariah status, therefore, was not necessarily a sign of disrespect, but rather a form of cautious containment. The community maintained a safe distance from the dangerous, transformative power he wielded, ensuring his talents were available while his unsettling influence was kept at bay. Now flip this image entirely, and we encounter the second mystery, the royal armorer. In direct contrast to the pariah, many blacksmiths occupied positions of immense prestige, acting as trusted advisors and exclusive craftsmen for chieftains and kings. In the hierarchical world of a Celtic tribe or a Germanic hall, the smith who could produce the finest swords and the strongest armor was not just a vendor, he was a strategic asset. His work directly determined the military success and therefore the political survival of the ruler. A king's power was quite literally forged in the smith's fire. This granted the master smith unparalleled access and influence. He would have been a constant presence in the royal compound, privy to battle plans and political intrigues. His opinion on the quality of weapons, the supply of iron, and even the readiness for war would have carried immense weight. He was the equivalent of a modern-day Minister of Defense and Chief of Military Research and Development combined. This privileged position was about more than just utility. The weapons and armor he created were potent symbols of kingship, A pattern-welded sword was not merely a tool, it was a crown jewel, an heirloom that legitimized a ruler's authority. The smith who could create such objects was therefore a legitimizer himself. By crafting the symbols of power, he participated in the performance of kingship. This relationship was likely sealed by bonds of gift-giving and patronage. A successful king would reward his armorer with land, wealth, and high-status gifts, weaving him into the fabric of the elite. The royal armorer's workshop was not on the edge of town. It was at the very heart of power, a testament to the fact that in many societies, technological mastery was the most direct path to social elevation and political influence. The ultimate resolution of this status paradox is found in our third and most compelling mystery, the Smith King. While rare, history and legend provide tantalizing glimpses of individuals who combine the technical mastery of the forge with the ultimate political authority of a ruler. These were not kings who merely patronized smiths, they were kings who were themselves master blacksmiths. The most famous example comes from Irish mythology, the god-hero Goibniu, who was one of the Tuatha De Danann, a divine race of rulers. Goibniu was not just their smith, he was a king among them, his ability to craft invincible weapons being intrinsically linked to his right to rule. This mythical archetype finds echoes in historical figures. The biblical figure Tubal-Cain is described as an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron, a master of metal who was also part of the ancestral lineage before the Great Flood, placing him in a position of foundational authority. The existence, or even the persistent legend, of the Smith King solves the social paradox in the most direct way possible by merging the two roles. It represents a world view where the skill to create and transform the material world was not just a service to power, but the very essence of power itself. A king who could work the forge was a king who understood the source of his military strength at the most fundamental level. He embodied the principle that true leadership required a hands-on mastery of the technology that defined the age. This fusion would have commanded a unique form of respect, blending the awe reserved for a magician-smith with the loyalty owed to a chieftain. The Smith King was the ultimate affirmation that the power of the anvil and the power of the throne were, in the final analysis, two sides of the same carefully wrought coin. Yet this mastery of earthly ores, from bog iron to phosphoric pillars, represents only one source of material for the ancient smith. Some looked beyond the soils and streams, seeking out powers far more primal and exotic, drawing their strength from the very fires of the earth and the heavens themselves. This leads us to a triad of mysteries centered on the most extraordinary materials imaginable, beginning with the mythic volcanic forge. In places like Iceland, where vast lava fields testify to the planet's inner fury, archaeological evidence suggests that some blacksmiths harnessed geothermal vents and active volcanic areas for their work. The idea is both brilliant and terrifying. Instead of relying solely on the unpredictable and labor-intensive process of producing charcoal and stoking bellows, these smiths would have sought out fissures in the earth where superheated steam and gases naturally escaped, creating a ready-made perpetual furnace. Imagine the scene, a workshop built on the precarious edge of a steaming volcanic field, where the very ground is warm to the touch. Here, the smith could position his ore or metal directly over a fumarole, using the planet's own immense geothermal energy to achieve the temperatures needed for smelting or forging. This practice was undoubtedly steeped in profound myth. To work in such a place was to operate at a direct gateway to the underworld, a realm of powerful and often dangerous deities. In Norse cosmology, volcanoes were often seen as the forges of the dwarven masters or even the entrance to Muspelheim, the world of fire. The smith who dared to work there was not just a craftsman, he was a sorcerer tapping into the primordial heart of the world, and the objects produced in such a location would have been considered imbued with the raw, untamed power of the earth itself. The risks were immense, from toxic gases to sudden eruptions, making every successful creation a testament to both immense courage and a deep, respectful understanding of the forces being harnessed. But if the volcanic forge connected the smith to the power beneath the earth, an even more astounding material connected him to the cosmos above, meteoritic iron. This brings us to one of the most captivating archaeological finds of all time, an object that perfectly encapsulates this mystery, the dagger buried with the Egyptian pharaoh Tutankhamun. Crafted with a gorgeous gold haft, the blade itself was made not from earthly iron, but from metal that had fallen from the sky. Scientific analysis has confirmed its high nickel content, the definitive signature of an iron-nickel meteorite. The very existence of this dagger raises a profound question. How, in an age before widespread ironworking in Egypt, did artisans even recognize this rare, lumpy, and heavily oxidized material as a source of valuable metal? A meteorite, after all, does not look like a gleaming sword. It is a pitted, dark, and unremarkable stone to the untrained eye. The answer likely lies in a combination of keen observation and a worldview that saw the heavens as a direct source of divine power. When a meteorite streaked across the sky and crashed to Earth, it was a spectacular, undeniable event, a piece of the sky falling to the ground. For a culture that revered the sun and stars as gods, this was not a random rock. It was a physical gift from the deities, a sacred object in its own right. The first people to find it would have treated it with immense reverence, likely as a cult object placed in a temple. At some point, a truly ingenious and brave smith must have experimented with this sky stone, perhaps noticing its unusual weight or that when broken, it revealed a metallic, silvery interior. The process of heating and hammering it would have been a ritual act of the highest order, an attempt to unlock the divine essence trapped within the celestial gift. The result was a material so rare and significant that it was reserved for royalty and the gods. In a world where iron was rarer than gold, a blade made from star metal was the ultimate status symbol. It proclaimed that the pharaoh's authority was not just terrestrial but cosmic, sanctioned by the powers of the heavens. The dagger was likely not intended for battle. It was a ceremonial object, a symbol of divine kingship that connected Tutankhamun directly to the gods from whom his power was derived. This practice was not unique to Egypt. From the ancient Inuit of Greenland, who used Cape York meteorite iron for tools, to cultures across the Americas and Asia, there is evidence that whenever a meteorite fall was witnessed, the material was sought out and treasured. The smiths who worked it held a unique position, acting as intermediaries who could translate a celestial event into a tangible object of power, blurring the lines between craftsman, priest, and astronomer. This profound cosmological significance culminates in our final mystery of this group, the legend of the star metal weapons. The concept of forging weapons from metal that originated in the heavens is a thread that runs through the mythology of countless cultures. The idea that a sword or an arrowhead could be made from a star tapped into the belief that such an object would possess otherworldly properties, unbreakable strength, a razor's edge that never dulled, or even the ability to vanquish supernatural creatures. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest stories in the world, the hero's axe is described as being made of a material forged by the gods themselves, a description that many scholars interpret as a reference to meteoritic iron. The Arthurian legend of Excalibur, a sword presented by a mystical lady from a lake, also carries echoes of this ancient tradition, a weapon of destiny drawn from an otherworldly source. For the smith, creating such a weapon was the pinnacle of his career. It required not only technical skill but also immense spiritual preparation. The act of hammering the star metal was seen as releasing the power trapped within, a power that was inherently celestial and therefore pure and potent. The weapon was believed to carry a fraction of the star's soul, making it inherently magical. A warrior wielding a star metal sword would feel invincible, believing he carried a sliver of the night sky itself into battle, a direct line to the gods who had sent the metal as a blessing. The mystery of star metal, therefore, is not just one of material science, but of human psychology and belief. It represents the ultimate fusion of the smith's earthly craft with humanity's timeless awe of the cosmos, creating objects that were as much articles of faith as they were tools of war, their true power lying as much in the story they told as in the unyielding strength of the metal from which they were forged. Yet the blacksmith's mastery over the physical world extended far beyond the creation of weapons and tools for daily life, reaching into the most intimate and vulnerable aspects of human existence, health and healing. This brings us to a triad of mysteries that reveal the smith as a pivotal figure in community well-being, a role that seamlessly blended the practical with the profoundly mystical. First, we must consider the enigmatic figure of the healing smith. In many small, isolated Iron Age communities, the person who possessed the finest metal tools and the knowledge to shape them was often the same person called upon to mend a broken body. The skills required for the two tasks were surprisingly analogous. A smith understood the nature of materials, their strength, their flexibility, their breaking points. Setting a broken bone was not so different from straightening a bent iron rod. Both required a careful assessment of the damage, a firm but controlled application of force, and the use of splints or clamps to hold the repair in place. The smith's strong, steady hands, accustomed to the precise manipulation of glowing metal, were ideally suited for the delicate work of realigning a fracture. His workshop, a place of transformation and repair for objects, naturally became a place of healing for people. This leads directly to our next mystery, the creation of specialized surgical tools. Archaeological finds from across Europe increasingly include finely crafted iron artifacts that defy simple classification. We discover narrow, razor-sharp blades that are too delicate for woodworking but perfect for making a clean incision. We find small, precise saws with fine teeth, ideal for cutting through bone during amputations or trepanation, the ancient practice of drilling a hole in the skull, perhaps to relieve pressure or to release evil spirits. There are even examples of probes, forceps, and cautery irons, the latter used to sear wounds shut and prevent infection. These objects are a testament to a sophisticated understanding of the body as a system that could be mechanically repaired. The smith who forged these tools was not merely a supplier, he was a collaborator with a healer, or perhaps he was the healer himself. The design of these implements suggests a deep, empirical knowledge of human anatomy and surgical procedure. A scalpel's balance, a saw's tooth pattern, the shape of a bone lever, these are not random designs. They are the product of accumulated experience, of observing what works and what causes harm, refined over generations. The presence of such tools in a smith's workshop blurs the line between forge and clinic, suggesting a holistic view of the craftsman's role as a mender of all that was broken, be it plow, sword, or human bone. However, to view this role through a purely practical, modern medical lens would be to miss a crucial dimension of the Iron Age worldview. This brings us to the third mystery in this group, the creation of magical implements for healing. For ancient people, illness and injury were rarely seen as purely physical phenomena. A disease could be caused by an evil spirit, a curse, or an imbalance in the cosmic order. Therefore, a cure often required a spiritual or magical intervention alongside any physical treatment. Here, the smith's power as a master of transformative materials made him the ideal person to create objects of protection. Alongside his surgical scalpels, he would craft amulets and talismans from iron, bronze, or even silver. These were not mere decorations, they were functional medical devices in the spiritual realm. A simple iron ring, hammered and inscribed with protective symbols, might be worn to ward off fever. A small, twisted rod of metal, perhaps shaped like a serpent, a symbol of regeneration, could be carried to promote healing. The act of forging these items in the sacred fire of the forge was believed to imbue them with protective power, charging them with the same transformative energy that turned ore into steel. The distinction between a surgical tool and a magical implement was often non-existent. The same sharp blade used to lance an abscess might first be used to inscribe a protective symbol on the patient's skin. A cautery iron used to burn a wound closed would bear a symbol of fire to enhance its purifying effect. The smith healer was therefore a hybrid figure, a technician of the body and a mediator of the spirit. His toolkit contained both the bone saw for the tangible and the amulet for the intangible. He addressed the whole person, understanding that a successful recovery depended on convincing the patient's mind and spirit of the remedy's power as much as on the physical procedure itself. This multifaceted role cemented the smith's central place in the community. He was present at the most critical moments of life and death, not just as a crafter of weapons that could end life, but as a wielder of tools and charms that could preserve it. His workshop was a place where the harsh realities of the physical world met the enduring power of belief, and where the line between science and magic was not a boundary to be defended, but a spectrum to be expertly navigated for the good of all. But our journey into the heart of the forge now compels us to look outward, beyond the workshop's smoky confines to the vast, interconnected world of trade and resources that fueled these ancient technological revolutions. This brings us to a trio of profound logistical mysteries: the legend of a lost city of metals, the enduring enigma of the tin trade, and the sprawling, secretive copper routes that wove continents together. We begin with a tantalizing idea found in the whispers of ancient texts and legends, the concept of a lost city of metals. From the biblical account of Tubal-Cain, an instructor of all metalworkers, to vague classical references to fabulously wealthy cities in the distant east or west that were the source of all bronze and iron, there is a persistent notion of a single, primal source for metallurgical knowledge and material. Was this merely a mythological device, a way for later cultures to explain the sudden appearance of such a transformative technology? Or could it point to a historical reality, a specific, early, and incredibly advanced center of metal production that served as a cradle for the craft, whose location has been lost to time? Some scholars have speculated about places like Tartessos in southern Spain, a wealthy kingdom mentioned by Greek historians that seemingly vanished, renowned for its mineral riches. Others look to the Caucasus Mountains, a region incredibly rich in ores and a known early center of metallurgy, which could have been the city or region from which master smiths and their secrets radiated outward. The legend reflects a deep-seated human desire to pinpoint an origin, to find a singular, almost sacred birthplace for the power that so dramatically changed the world. The mystery of this lost city is not just about geography. It's about the dispersal of ideas, suggesting that the secret of metalworking was so valuable it might have originated in one brilliant flash of innovation before being carried by itinerant smiths along ancient pathways, leaving only a ghost of its origin in collective memory. This search for origins leads us directly to one of the most critical and puzzling trade networks in ancient history, the Great Tin Trade. To understand its importance, we must remember that bronze, the metal that defined an entire age before iron, is not a naturally occurring metal. It is an alloy, a deliberate mixture of copper and tin. While copper sources are relatively widespread across Europe and the Mediterranean, tin is incredibly rare. The addition of roughly 10% tin to copper transforms the soft, malleable metal into hard, durable bronze capable of holding a sharp edge. The mystery is this: across the Bronze Age Mediterranean and Middle East, from Mesopotamia to Minoan Crete to Mycenaean Greece, civilizations were producing bronze on a massive scale. The sheer volume of bronze artifacts found by archaeologists implies a constant, huge, and reliable supply of tin. But where was it all coming from? The known tin mines in places like Anatolia or the Near East were insufficient to meet this colossal demand. The answer lies in long-distance trade routes of staggering complexity and secrecy. The primary sources for the ancient world were almost certainly in two far-flung locations, Cornwall in southwestern Britain and Afghanistan. The idea of Bronze Age ships or overland caravans moving tons of heavy tin ore from the remote cliffs of Cornwall to the palaces of Mycenae or the cities of Egypt is mind-boggling. This was not a casual trade, it was an economic lifeline as strategically vital as oil is today. The secrecy surrounding these routes was paramount. A kingdom that controlled a tin source or a key segment of the trade route held immense power. Knowledge of the sources and the safe paths to transport the ore would have been guarded more fiercely than any military secret. This is where the blacksmith re-enters the story not just as an end user, but as a crucial node in the network. A master smith, through contact with traders and other smiths, would have been one of the few people who understood the qualities of tin from different regions. He could have acted as an assayer, verifying the purity of the ore upon its arrival, and his demand for specific types of tin would have directly influenced the trade. The tin trade enigma, therefore, is a story of global economics in antiquity, a hidden web of connections that bound seemingly separate civilizations together through a shared dependency on a single, rare resource. This network, however, was not solely dedicated to tin. It was part of a much broader and even more ancient system, the complex copper routes. Long before tin became the critical ingredient for bronze, copper was the first metal humanity learned to use. Sources of copper were scattered across the ancient world, from Cyprus, whose name itself is derived from the word for copper, to the Alps to the Sinai Peninsula. The trade in copper was the foundation upon which the tin trade was built. What's fascinating is that these routes were not simply lines on a map from mine to market. They were circulatory systems for ideas, technologies, and cultures. A smith working in a village in Central Europe might be using copper from Cyprus, alloying it with tin from Cornwall, and employing a technique learned from a traveling smith who had originated in Anatolia. The metal itself became a physical carrier of cultural exchange. The role of the smith in this network was potentially that of a spy or an industrial diplomat. An experienced smith traveling along these trade routes to find better materials or new techniques would have been a walking repository of valuable intelligence. He would know which mines were productive, which trade routes were safe, and what new technologies rival cultures were developing. A ruler would prize such a smith not only for his skill but for the information he carried. Furthermore, the smiths may have developed their own system of marks or symbols, stamped onto ingots of copper and tin, that certified their quality and origin, a kind of prehistoric quality assurance that allowed metal to be traded over vast distances between parties who did not share a language but shared a trust in the craft. The existence of these standardized ingots, like the oxhide-shaped copper ingots found all across the Mediterranean, suggests a level of commercial sophistication that required the expert judgment of the smith to maintain. The mysteries of the lost city, the tin trade, and the copper routes ultimately reveal a world far more connected and economically sophisticated than we often imagine. A world where the blacksmith was not an isolated figure, but an integral part of a globalized system, his forge the final destination in a journey that spanned continents and fueled the rise and fall of empires. But if the blacksmith's art reached its most dramatic expression in the creation of devastating weapons, its most vital application may well have been in the crafting of defense, the intricate, laborious work of preserving life rather than taking it. This brings us to a triad of mysteries centered on the pinnacle of protective gear, the legend of invulnerable armor, the revolutionary technology of chainmail, and the fearsome power of the helmet. Across the ancient world, tales abound of armor so perfect it was impervious to any weapon. The Greek hero Achilles, for instance, was said to possess armor forged by the god Hephaestus himself, a divine suit that made him nearly invincible on the battlefield. Similar legends appear in Norse sagas and Celtic myths, where a champion's resistance to harm is directly attributed to the supernatural skill of the smith who made his breastplate or shield. These stories tap into a universal desire for ultimate protection, but they also point to a fascinating reality. In an age of close-quarters combat, the difference between a good armor and a mediocre one was the difference between life and death. A smith who could consistently produce armor that withstood powerful blows would have been seen as providing a gift that bordered on the magical. His reputation would soar, and his work would become the stuff of legend, with each surviving battle adding to the mythos of his invulnerable creations. The legend, then, may have been a folkloric exaggeration of a very real truth, that the finest Iron Age armor, crafted by a true master from the best materials using secret techniques, would have been so effective against the common weapons of the day that it might as well have been divine. The most tangible example of this defensive genius is not a mythical suit, but a stunningly practical invention: chainmail. To the untrained eye, it might look like a simple metal shirt, but the creation of a single chainmail hauberk was one of the most labor-intensive processes ever undertaken in the ancient world. The mystery begins with its very origin. Did this technology arise in one place and spread, or was it independently invented by brilliant minds in different parts of the globe? The Celts of Europe are most famously credited with its development, and Roman legions, who initially faced Celtic warriors clad in these flexible metal garments, quickly adopted and standardized its use. But there are also intriguing and much earlier examples of mail-like armor from as far away as ancient China. This simultaneous appearance poses a fascinating puzzle. Was this a case of parallel invention, where smiths in separate cultures, faced with the same problem of creating flexible yet strong protection, arrived at the same ingenious solution? Or does it point to a lost thread of cultural exchange along the vast, interconnected trade routes of Eurasia, with the knowledge of interlocking metal rings passing from one master smith to another over centuries? The answer remains elusive, making chainmail a testament to either the universal spark of human ingenuity or the hidden networks of ancient technology transfer. The process of making chainmail was a marathon of patience and precision. It began by drawing out iron wire, a skilled task in itself, which was then coiled tightly around a rod and sliced down one side to create thousands of individual rings. Each of these rings had to be punched flat at the ends, then interlocked with 4 others in a pattern called 4-in-1, and finally, the ends of each ring were riveted shut. Imagine the focus required. A single shirt could require over 20,000 rings, each one meticulously linked and closed by hand. The resulting garment was a marvel of engineering. It was flexible enough to allow for a full range of motion, yet it distributed the force of a blow across a wide area, effectively resisting slashing attacks and, to a lesser extent, thrust. It was also surprisingly lightweight compared to solid plate armor. For a warrior, donning a hauberk was like wearing a second skin of iron, a physical manifestation of the smith's dedication. The countless hours hammered into each link represented a huge investment of time and skill, making chainmail an expensive and highly valued possession, often passed down through generations. Its effectiveness was so proven that it remained a primary form of body armor in Europe for nearly 1,000 years, a staggering longevity that speaks volumes about the brilliance of its initial design. While chainmail protected the body, the helmet served a dual purpose, shielding the most vulnerable part of the warrior and projecting an intimidating identity. This brings us to the mystery of the helmets of power. Archaeological finds from across the Iron Age world reveal that helmets were rarely simple, functional parts for the head. They were canvases for symbolism, artistry, and psychological warfare. A Celtic helmet might be crowned with elaborate crests of animal hair or bronze horns. A Germanic helm could feature a fearsome metal mask with a bristling mustache and glaring eyes. The Norse crafted helmets with protective face guards shaped into the forms of birds of prey, their beaks menacing the enemy. This investment in elaborate decoration points to a purpose far beyond simple protection. The helmet was the warrior's public face in battle, a mask that transformed him from an individual man into a symbol of terror and power. By adorning his helmet with the attributes of a wolf, a bear, or a bird, the warrior was attempting to channel the spirit of that animal, to gain its ferocity, its speed, or its predatory instinct. This was a form of sympathetic magic where the smith, in crafting the helmet, was not just a metal worker but a kind of spiritual tailor, stitching the essence of a totemic animal into the very armor that guarded the seat of consciousness. Furthermore, the helmet was a potent marker of status and leadership. An ornate, gilded helmet with intricate designs immediately identified a chieftain or a king on the battlefield, serving as a rallying point for his followers. But its power may have run even deeper. Some scholars suggest that certain helmets, particularly those with enclosed face guards or striking animal features, were believed to be imbued with a protective spirit of their own. The smith, through the rituals of its forging and the symbols he incorporated, might have been seen as trapping a guardian spirit within the metal. In this view, the helmet wasn't just a piece of equipment. It was a vessel for a supernatural guardian, a second mind watching over the warrior, granting him not only physical protection but also courage and battle luck. The act of putting on the helmet was therefore a ritual of transformation, where the man disappeared and the warrior avatar emerged, empowered by the skill of the smith and the blessings of the unseen world. The helmet, then, encapsulates the Iron Age blacksmith's complete role. He was a master engineer creating life-saving technology, a profound artist crafting symbols of identity, and a mystical figure believed to infuse his creations with a power that transcended the mere metal from which they were made. But the blacksmith's command over metal extended far beyond the realm of the visible and the tangible, into the very air itself, shaping sound into a force of both celebration and spiritual power. This brings us to a triad of mysteries centered on the forge as a source of sacred noise, beginning with the creation of musical metals. Long before the first swords were drawn in battle, the ring of metal was used to create harmony and awe. The smith's skill in casting and hammering was perfectly suited for crafting instruments that could project sound over great distances and captivate large audiences. Consider the bronze lyre, a long, twisting horn found in Scandinavian bogs. These instruments, sometimes over 2 meters in length, were marvels of lost wax casting, requiring the smith to create a precise clay mold around a wax model, melt the wax out, and then pour the molten bronze into the resulting cavity. The resulting horn produced a deep, resonant, almost haunting tone that could carry for miles across a fjord or a forest. Similarly, the crafting of large gongs or ritual cymbals required an intimate understanding of an alloy's acoustic properties. The smith had to achieve the perfect bronze mix, the right balance of copper and tin to produce a clear, sustained ring when struck rather than a dull clang. This was acoustical engineering by intuition, where the smith was both metallurgist and musician, tuning the very molecular structure of the metal to create a desired sound. These instruments were not for casual entertainment, they were tools of social cohesion and ritual. The blast of a bronze horn might announce the arrival of a king, call a community to assembly, or signal the beginning of a sacred ceremony, its sound weaving the people together in a shared auditory experience. This sacred dimension of sound finds its purest expression in our next mystery, the specific and powerful ritual uses of Iron Age bells. Bells are deceptively simple objects, but their creation required immense skill to shape a hollow form that would produce a clear, pleasing tone. Across Europe, archaeologists have discovered small bells made of bronze or iron in contexts that scream of ritual significance. They are found in burials, tucked into the clothing of the deceased, perhaps to guide their spirit or protect them on the journey to the afterlife. They are uncovered in boundary ditches around settlements, where their ringing might have been believed to create an invisible sonic barrier against malevolent forces. The sound of a bell, with its pure, high-frequency vibration, was thought to have the power to purify a space, to drive away evil spirits that were believed to be repelled by such clear, resonant tones. This belief persisted for millennia, finding echoes in the church bells of later centuries. The blacksmith who cast these bells was therefore not just making a noisemaker, he was crafting a spiritual tool, a device for interacting with the unseen world. The process of making a bell would have been its own ritual. The precise shape and thickness of the metal determined its pitch, and that pitch had to be right. It had to align with whatever spiritual purpose the bell was meant to serve. A bell for a funeral might be tuned to a different, perhaps more somber, note than a bell used to celebrate a harvest. The smith, in essence, was composing a single, sacred note that would resonate through both the physical and spiritual realms. This leads us to the most pervasive and yet often overlooked sonic mystery of all, the idea that the rhythmic hammering of the forge itself was considered a form of powerful, transformative music. Step back and listen to the sounds of an Iron Age workshop. There is the deep, breathing rhythm of the bellows, the sharp, percussive strike of the hammer on hot metal, the sizzling hiss of the quench. This was not random noise, it was a complex, rhythmic composition, the industrial music of the age. This rhythm was the heartbeat of the community, a constant, reassuring sound that signaled productivity, safety, and technological prowess. But on a deeper level, many scholars believe this rhythm was seen as inherently magical. In countless ancient traditions, from shamanic drumming to communal chanting, rhythm is used to alter consciousness, to enter trance states, and to bridge the gap between the worlds. The repetitive, hypnotic pounding of the smith's hammer could have served a similar function. It may have been believed that this steady beat helped to focus the smith's intention, driving his will directly into the metal with each blow. The rhythm organized the chaotic energy of the fire and the transformation, imposing a human order on the elemental forces being harnessed. Furthermore, the sound of the forge would have been audible throughout the settlement, a constant auditory reminder of the smith's presence and power. It was the community's percussive anchor, its steady pulse connecting the everyday life of the village to the mystical acts of creation happening at its heart. The blacksmith was therefore a composer and conductor of a powerful sonic environment, his hammer serving as a drumstick that not only shaped iron but also, in the minds of his people, helped to shape the very fabric of reality, vibrating in harmony with the rhythms of the earth and the spirit world. But perhaps the most magnificent fusion of the blacksmith's practical skill and profound symbolic power lies not in a weapon or a tool, but in a vessel designed for community and ceremony. We now arrive at a triad of mysteries centered on objects of breathtaking artistry and deep ritual significance: the ceremonial cauldrons, the feast of the gods, and the singular enigma of the Gunderstrup cauldron. These were not mere pots for cooking. They were the Iron Age equivalent of sacred altars and epic canvases combined, crafted from precious metal and imbued with meanings we are still striving to fully decipher. The mystery of the ceremonial cauldrons begins with their sheer scale and opulence. Imagine a vessel large enough to hold an entire roasted boar, constructed not from clay but from sheets of hammered silver or bronze, and adorned with intricate repoussé work, where the scenes are pushed out from the back of the metal to create a shimmering, three-dimensional narrative. The creation of such an object was a monumental undertaking that pushed the limits of the smith's art. It required the careful smelting and alloying of vast quantities of metal, followed by the incredibly delicate process of hammering it into thin, even sheets without tearing it. These sheets then had to be skillfully joined, likely through a combination of riveting and a form of soldering, to create a watertight seal, a task far more complex than forging a solid object like a sword. The cauldron was a masterpiece of sheet metal engineering, a testament to a smith's patience and precision, but its true purpose was far greater than holding stew. In a world without written histories, such a cauldron served as a physical repository of a tribe's mythology and identity. The scenes hammered into its surface were not random decorations. They were a sacred text in metal, a visual epic that everyone in the community could understand. The cauldron itself became a centerpiece around which the tribe's stories were told, its legends reinforced and its values transmitted from one generation to the next. It was, in effect, a mobile, indestructible library of cultural memory. This leads us directly to the mystery of the Feast of the Gods. The primary function of these great cauldrons was almost certainly for communal feasting, an activity that was the bedrock of Iron Age social and political life. A feast was far more than a meal. It was a powerful ritual that reaffirmed the social hierarchy, secured the loyalty of warriors, and celebrated alliances. The chieftain who possessed a magnificent cauldron and could fill it with food and drink for his people was demonstrating his wealth, his generosity, and his right to lead. The act of sharing food from a single, sacred vessel created a powerful bond among those who partook. It was a tangible expression of community, a literal communion that strengthened the ties of kinship and obligation. But the feast had a deeper, mythological dimension as well. In the legends of many Celtic and Germanic peoples, the gods themselves were often depicted as holding great feasts in their otherworld halls. The Irish god Dagda possessed a cauldron that was never empty, a symbol of infinite abundance. By hosting a feast with a magnificent cauldron at its center, a chieftain was consciously emulating the gods, creating a microcosm of the divine feast here on earth. He was asserting that his hall and his leadership were a reflection of the cosmic order. The consumption of food and drink, particularly mead or ale, from the cauldron might have been seen as a way to absorb the power and blessings of the deities and heroes depicted on its sides. The feast was therefore both a political tool and a religious ceremony, and the cauldron was the essential sacred object that made the entire ritual possible. All of these mysteries converge in one of the most stunning and puzzling archaeological discoveries ever made, the Gundestrup cauldron. Found dismantled and carefully placed in a peat bog in Denmark in 1891, this large silver vessel is the ultimate expression of the ceremonial cauldron's power. Its existence is a riddle wrapped in an enigma. The craftsmanship is extraordinary, yet its style is a confusing mixture of Celtic and Thracian artistic traditions, suggesting it may have been crafted far from where it was found, perhaps in the Balkans. Why was such a priceless object taken apart and deposited in a remote Danish bog? The scenes hammered onto its plates are a dense, mesmerizing tapestry of gods, goddesses, and mythical beings. We see a horned figure, often identified as the Celtic god Cernunnos, sitting in a peaceful, cross-legged posture, holding a torque and a serpent surrounded by stags and other animals. On another plate, a line of warriors with spears and carnix war trumpets marches in unison. There is a scene that appears to depict a ritual sacrifice with a giant figure dunking a smaller man into a cauldron. And most famously, there is the plate showing a god or hero wrestling with a bull, perhaps in an act of ritual slaughter. The mystery of the Gundestrup cauldron lies in interpreting this complex visual language. Each scene is a frozen moment from a lost story. The cauldron does not present a single, linear narrative, but rather a collection of powerful religious symbols and mythological episodes. It was likely designed to be read by a priest or a chieftain during a ceremony, with each plate serving as a starting point for a recitation of a specific myth or the invocation of a particular deity. The act of looking into the cauldron's reflective silver interior, perhaps filled with a sacred liquid or the blood of a sacrificial animal, might have been believed to open a window to the otherworld, allowing communication with the gods depicted on its sides. Its final deposition in the bog was almost certainly the climax of its story. This was not an act of disposal, but one of the most profound sacrifices imaginable. A community, perhaps in a time of extreme crisis or as part of a treaty with the gods, chose to offer this masterpiece, this container of their deepest myths and a symbol of their leader's divine authority, back to the earth. By sinking it into the sacred waters of the bog, a gateway to the gods, they were making the ultimate offering, surrendering their greatest treasure in the hope of receiving divine favor in return. The Gundestrup cauldron, therefore, stands as the ultimate symbol of the Iron Age blacksmith's role. He was not just a maker of objects, he was a creator of sacred vessels that contained the very soul of his people, their stories, their gods, and their deepest hopes, forged in silver and given over to the earth in an act of faith that has echoed for millennia. Yet for all the smith's command over the roaring heart of the forge, the moment of its extinguishing was not a casual act but a ritual of profound significance. The fire-dousing ritual was the ceremonial bookend to the sacred act of lighting the forge. We often focus on the ignition, the spark of creation, but the conclusion held its own deep mystery. This was not merely a matter of letting the fire burn out or dousing it with water for safety. In a world where fire was seen as a living entity, a spiritual force on loan from the gods or ancestral spirits, its release required proper observance. A forge fire that had successfully produced a sword or a sacred cauldron was believed to be imbued with the power of that creation. To simply snuff it out would be disrespectful, even dangerous, like dismissing a powerful ally without thanks. It was thought that the spirit of the fire, if treated carelessly, might carry a grudge, leading to future failures in the smithy or worse, misfortune for the community. Therefore, the dousing was likely accompanied by prayers, quiet words of gratitude, or perhaps a small offering, a pinch of grain, a drop of ale, tossed into the embers as a final tribute before the water or earth was applied. This ritual acknowledged a fundamental cycle. The fire had been summoned, it had served its divine purpose, and now its essence was being returned, its temporary life honored so that it might be willingly called upon again. The smith, in this final act, demonstrated his understanding that his power was not absolute. It was a negotiated partnership with the elemental forces he commanded. This reverence for the elemental cycle finds its most dramatic and visually stunning expression in the water-quenching mystery. Picture the climax of the forging process. The smith pulls a blade from the fire, glowing with a brilliant, otherworldly orange-white heat. The air shimmers around it. Then, with a decisive motion, he plunges it into a waiting trough of water. The result is a violent, theatrical hiss, a great cloud of steam erupting as fire and water meet in a furious embrace. To the modern eye, this is a straightforward metallurgical process, rapid cooling to harden the steel. But in the Iron Age, this was high drama, a moment of immense risk and powerful symbolism. It was the ultimate confrontation of the primal opposites, fire, the active, masculine, transformative element, versus water, the passive, feminine, receptive element. Their meeting was not just a physical reaction, it was a cosmic marriage, a moment of creation born from conflict. The success of this union was far from guaranteed. Quench the blade too quickly and it could shatter like glass, a catastrophic failure that meant days of work were lost in an instant. Quench it too slowly and it would remain soft, useless as a weapon. This precarious balance meant the moment of quenching was fraught with tension, likely surrounded by strict taboos and rituals to appease the spirits of both elements. What were these rituals? The smith might utter specific chants or invocations to the water spirit, perhaps asking it to receive the fire spirit of the metal gently, to cool it without breaking it. The water itself might be considered special, drawn from a sacred well or a running stream at a particular phase of the moon, believed to possess calming or strengthening properties. In some traditions, the quenching water was not pure but was mixed with other substances, each with its own symbolic meaning. As we've touched on, the use of brine or oil could be a practical choice to moderate the cooling rate, but it could also be a magical one. The salt in brine might have been seen as a purifying agent, driving out malevolent spirits from the metal. The blood of a powerful animal, like a stag or a bull, could be added to the water in the belief that the creature's strength and vitality would be transferred into the blade during this critical moment of transformation. The quenching process was therefore a sacred recipe, a blend of practical knowledge and spiritual belief. The cloud of steam that enveloped the workshop was not just water vapor, it was the visible breath of this elemental union, the mingled spirits of fire and water giving birth to the hardened soul of the sword. A successful quench was a sign that the smith had correctly mediated between these opposing forces, balancing their power to achieve a miraculous result. This delicate mediation leads us directly to the overarching mystery of elemental balance. The blacksmith's workshop was a microcosm where all four classical elements were not just present, but were actively manipulated in a state of harmonious tension. Earth was represented by the raw ore, the very bones of the planet. Air was the vital breath pumped by the bellows, giving life to the fire. Fire was the transformative agent, the divine spark. And water was the final moderator, the element that fixed the transformation in place. The smith's genius lay in his ability to hold these four powerful and often opposing forces in a perfect creative equilibrium. He was the conductor of an elemental orchestra. If the earth, the ore, was impure, the metal would be flawed. If the air from the bellows was insufficient, the fire would languish. If the fire was too weak or too strong, the transformation would fail. And if the water was not applied with perfect timing and respect, the final product would be destroyed. His entire craft was a perpetual dance with these primal powers. This perceived mastery is what elevated the smith to the status of a cosmic figure. In the eyes of his community, he was not just a man who bent metal, he was a sage who understood the secret language of the universe itself. He could make the solid earth yield its hidden treasure, command the invisible air to feed his flames, harness the terrifying power of fire without being consumed by it, and finally, persuade the fluid water to solidify the fiery metal into a permanent form. This made him a living bridge between the worlds, a person who could navigate the conflicts between elemental forces and force them to collaborate. His workshop was a holy site because it was a place where the fundamental building blocks of reality were visibly and audibly brought into harmony. The rhythmic roar of the fire, the whoosh of the bellows, the hammer's percussive strike on the solid anvil, and the final explosive hiss of the quench, this was the symphony of creation, and the blacksmith was its composer and sole performer. His role as a master of elemental balance explained why he was often consulted on matters far beyond metalwork. If he could mediate between fire and water, perhaps he could also mediate between warring clans or between the human community and the capricious gods. His authority was rooted in a deep, visceral understanding that true power lies not in dominating the elements, but in understanding their relationships and guiding their interactions toward a purposeful and beautiful end. Moving from the cosmic significance of elemental balance, we now turn to the deeply human impulse to leave a personal signature on one's work. This brings us to three interconnected mysteries that reveal how blacksmiths etched their identity into history: the enigma of the smith's mark, the unique language of signature blades, and the powerful legacy of ancestral styles. In an age before written contracts or mass production, the object itself was the only testament to its maker, and these Iron Age artisans developed sophisticated, non-verbal ways of proclaiming their skill and lineage for all to see. The first of these, the smith's mark, represents one of the earliest forms of branding in human history. Imagine a simple, powerful symbol, a spiral, a triskel, a stylized animal, or a set of parallel lines struck into the tang of a sword, the socket of a spearhead, or the underside of a brooch. This was not a random decoration, it was a deliberate, permanent claim of authorship. The reasons for this practice were as practical as they were profound. On a basic level, it was a guarantee of quality. A warrior purchasing a sword would look for the mark of a renowned smith, much like a modern consumer looks for a trusted logo. That symbol was a silent promise that the weapon had been made with skill, using proven techniques and good materials. It was a way for a master craftsman to build a reputation that could travel far beyond his own village. But the mark also served a more personal function. It was a stamp of pride. The act of creating a fine blade was an immense investment of time, energy, and secret knowledge. To leave one's unique mark upon it was to say, "I made this. This work is a reflection of my spirit and my ability." In a world where most people were anonymous, the smith's mark was a powerful assertion of individual identity and achievement. Yet these marks were often more than just a simple signature. They could be a cryptic code, a puzzle that archaeologists are still deciphering. Some marks might represent the smith's name or his clan's totem animal. Others could be symbols of his patron deity, a hammer for Thor or a raven for Odin, invoking divine favor for the weapon and its wielder. Some scholars suggest that certain complex marks might not have identified a single smith, but rather a specific workshop or even a quality standard, much like a modern hallmarks on silver. The placement of the mark was also significant. A symbol hidden on the tang, which would be covered by the handle, might have been a secret known only to the smith and his client, a private sign of authenticity. A mark displayed prominently on the blade itself, however, was a public declaration, an advertisement of craftsmanship meant to be seen and recognized. This practice transforms every marked artifact into a tiny, silent letter from the past, waiting for us to understand its alphabet. When archaeologists find the same distinct spiral on a sword in Denmark and an axe head in England, it's not just a coincidence, it's evidence of a trade route, a migrating smith, or the widespread reputation of a particular workshop, allowing us to trace connections across a map that has been blank for centuries. Beyond a simple stamped symbol, a master smith's identity was woven into the very form and function of his creations, leading us to the mystery of the signature blade. While two swords might look similar to an untrained eye to a warrior or another smith, the subtle nuances of its design were as distinctive as a fingerprint. The specific style of a blade was a complex language that spoke volumes about its origin. This signature was expressed in multiple ways. The profile of the sword was a major indicator. Was the blade long and tapering gracefully to a point, or was it shorter and broader with a more abrupt tip? The design of the hilt and pommel was another clear signature. Some workshops favored distinctive lobed pommels, while others created intricate patterns of wire inlay on the grip. The exact method of pattern welding, the number of rods used, and the specific way they were twisted created a unique visual rhythm on the blade that was incredibly difficult to replicate. This wasn't just about aesthetics, it was about performance and philosophy. A smith from a region known for its wooded, close-quarters combat might design a shorter, sturdier hacking sword. A smith from a culture that favored open field warfare with shields might create a longer, more nimble blade optimized for thrusting and slicing. The balance of the sword where its center of gravity lay was a deeply personal choice of the smith, affecting how it felt in the hand. A warrior would become accustomed to the feel of a blade from a particular maker, and that familiarity could mean the difference between life and death. This is why a chieftain might send far and wide for a sword made by a specific smith. He wasn't just buying a weapon, he was buying a particular style of fighting, a specific balance and heft that suited his technique. The signature blade, therefore, was a perfect fusion of art, engineering, and individual expression, a testament to the fact that even within the rigid constraints of a functional object, the Iron Age blacksmith found a way to imprint his unique genius. This individual genius, however, was never born in a vacuum. It was part of a continuous stream of knowledge, a living tradition that brings us to our final mystery in this group, the powerful force of ancestral styles. A smith did not learn his craft from a book. He learned it by spending years, often decades, apprenticing under a master, usually his father or another relative. In this master-apprentice relationship, the student didn't just learn techniques, he absorbed an entire aesthetic and technical lineage. He learned to draw out the metal in a particular way, to shape the point of a spearhead with a specific curve, to finish the surface with a certain type of polishing stone. These were not random choices, they were the accumulated wisdom and preference of generations. This created distinct schools of craftsmanship, where the products of a particular region or even a single family line could be identified by their shared characteristics for centuries. We can see this clearly in the archaeological record. The Celtic Latin style, with its elegant, swirling, organic patterns, is unmistakable and appears on metalwork from France to Hungary. The distinctive animal art styles of the Germanic tribes from Scandinavia are equally recognizable. These were not just artistic fads, they were visual dialects of a shared cultural language. When a smith in Britain made a brooch in the Latin style, he was doing more than decorating an object. He was proclaiming a cultural affiliation, connecting his work to a broad Celtic identity that stretched across the continent. This persistence of style across generations makes the archaeological finds so much more than isolated artifacts. They become nodes in a vast family tree of craftsmanship. When an archaeologist unearths a sword in Poland that has the distinct hilt construction of a style known from Norway, it tells a story. It might speak of a migrating smith carrying his family's techniques to a new land, a captured weapon taken as a trophy of war, or a gift exchanged between allied chieftains to seal a pact. The ancestral style acts as a cultural tracer die, allowing us to see the flow of ideas, people, and influence across vast distances and long stretches of time. The marks, the signatures, and the styles are the cryptic language of identity that these master artisans left behind, a silent conversation between makers across the centuries that we are only now beginning to learn how to read. And so we arrive at the final, and perhaps the greatest mystery of all, one that encompasses every enigma we have explored. It is not a question of a lost technique or a cryptic symbol, but of a profound and enduring legacy. The ultimate puzzle is this: how did the Iron Age blacksmith, a figure so firmly rooted in the technology and spirituality of a specific ancient world, successfully transcend his own time to become one of the most powerful and persistent archetypes in human imagination? Why does the image of the solitary figure at the anvil, surrounded by fire and shadow, continue to resonate with us so deeply, thousands of years after his practical necessity has faded? The answer lies in the very essence of the smith's craft, which was always about more than just metal. He was humanity's first great engineer, a master of transformation who could take the raw, chaotic materials of the earth and impose upon them order, purpose, and beauty. This act of fundamental creation is the bedrock of civilization itself, but he was also our original wizard, a mystic who seemed to command elemental forces and converse with the spirit world through flame and ritual. He existed at the precise intersection of the tangible and the intangible, the practical and the magical. This unique combination made him an irresistible figure for storytelling. Long after the Iron Age gave way to other eras, the archetype of the smith simply refused to die. Instead, it evolved, shedding the specific cultural details of a Celtic goibniu or a Norse dwarf and being reborn in new forms. In the folklore of the European Middle Ages, the village blacksmith retained much of this ancient aura. He was still a central pillar of the community, a man of immense physical strength and practical knowledge. But the explicit connection to the gods had faded, replaced by a more generalized sense of earthy wisdom and reliability. He became a romanticized figure, the honest, hard-working craftsman whose forge was a social hub. Yet, even in this tamed form, whispers of his ancient power remained. He was often the one who could repair the magical sword or shoe the fairy king's horse, a clear echo of his older role as an intermediary between worlds. This figure, immortalized in poems like Longfellow's The Village Blacksmith, represents the first step in the archetype's journey, from a feared and revered magician to a beloved and trusted pillar of the community, yet still possessing an undercurrent of something special. The most spectacular transformation, however, occurred in the 20th and 21st centuries with the rise of fantasy literature. the archetype of the smith found its ultimate expression in the wizard. Think of J.R.R. Tolkien's profound influence. His character of Sauron in his fair guise as Anatar was the Lord of Gifts, a being who taught the elven smiths of a region the craft of creating the rings of power. This is a direct parallel to the divine smiths of myth who gifted knowledge to humanity. More explicitly, Tolkien's dwarves are a race of master smiths, their entire culture built around the forge, their greatest desire to craft objects of unimaginable beauty and power. This idea was then amplified by countless other authors. In the world of tabletop and video games, the blacksmith is an indispensable archetype, the non-player character to whom the hero brings rare materials to be forged into a legendary weapon. The act of creation is often a pivotal quest in itself. This enduring appeal stems from the fact that the smith satisfies a deep, fundamental human yearning. In a modern world dominated by impersonal factories and digital abstraction, we are captivated by the tangible, hands-on mastery he represents. He is the ultimate maker, a symbol of honest creation where skill, patience, and personal investment result in a unique and powerful object. He embodies the ideal of quality over quantity, of artistry over mass production. Furthermore, he represents the power of knowledge, not knowledge that is easily Googled, but secret, hard-won wisdom passed down through mentorship and experience. He is a reminder that true expertise is earned, not downloaded. The greatest mystery, then, is not that the image of the smith survived, but that it remains so potent. It speaks to a part of us that still believes in the magic of making, in the transformation of the ordinary into the extraordinary. The fire of the forge is a symbol of human ingenuity itself, and the rhythmic hammer blow is the heartbeat of creativity. The Iron Age blacksmith bequeathed to us a story, an archetype that answers our need for heroes who are not just warriors or kings, but creators. His legacy is the enduring idea that with fire, skill, and a touch of the mysterious, we can all shape a better world. He is, and will always be, the original wizard, whose greatest enchantment was convincing us that the power to create magic was never lost. It was simply waiting by the anvil for the next generation to pick up the hammer. This intricate web of social obligations and mystical power could not have functioned without a deeply ingrained, though entirely unwritten, set of rules governing the craft. Beyond the secret languages and the spiritual beliefs, there existed a powerful social mystery, the blacksmith's code, an informal but unbreakable system of ethics and conduct that every master and apprentice was expected to internalize. This was not a law written on parchment, it was a law written in the soot on the walls of the forge, passed down through example and stern correction. It governed every aspect of a smith's life, from the moment a young boy was accepted as an apprentice to the final retirement of a master, and it was the invisible framework that held the entire profession together, ensuring its survival and protecting its powerful secrets. The journey into this closed world began with apprenticeship, a process shrouded in its own rituals and unspoken rules. Taking on an apprentice was never a casual decision for a master smith. It was a weighty commitment, often reserved for a son or a close relative, a way of ensuring that the family's hard-won knowledge and reputation would continue. But even when an outsider was accepted, the code demanded a probationary period. The prospective apprentice wouldn't be handed a hammer on the first day. Instead, he would be given the most menial tasks: tending the fire, sweeping the floor, preparing the charcoal. This wasn't just about getting free labor, it was a crucial test of character. The master was watching intently. Was the boy patient? Was he observant? Did he show respect for the tools and the space? Most importantly, could he be trusted? The secrets he would eventually learn were the smith's most valuable possessions, and the code required absolute certainty that they would not be carelessly shared or stolen by a rival. This slow, deliberate initiation served as a filter, ensuring that only those with the right temperament and loyalty would be granted access to the mysteries of the craft. Once an apprentice proved himself, the transfer of knowledge itself was governed by strict protocols. The master would never simply explain a technique. He would demonstrate it, often without a word, forcing the apprentice to watch, to learn with his eyes and his intuition. The code emphasized learning by doing and by observing, not by being told. A complex process like pattern welding or the precise temperature for quenching would be revealed in stages over years. The apprentice might spend months mastering the drawing out of a simple rod before he was ever allowed to touch steel destined for a blade. This gradual, experiential learning was designed to build not just skill but deep, instinctual understanding. It also protected the master's secrets. By never laying out the entire process verbally, he ensured that the apprentice could only piece the puzzle together through long, dedicated service. This method created a natural hierarchy of knowledge where a journeyman, a smith who had left his master but was not yet a master himself, knew more than an apprentice but less than a master who held the final, most crucial secrets. The code enforced this hierarchy, preventing a journeyman from setting up a rival shop too close to his master or from undercutting his prices, thus maintaining a stable and respectful professional environment. This extended to the delicate matter of pricing and client relations, another area where the unwritten code provided essential guidance. How did a smith set a price for a sword? It wasn't a simple calculation of materials and time. The code dictated that the price should reflect the object's true value, which included the smith's skill, the rarity of the materials, and the importance of the client. Charging too little was just as dishonorable as charging too much. It devalued the entire craft and undercut fellow smiths. There was an understanding of a fair market value that everyone in the region adhered to, creating an informal guild system that prevented destructive price wars. When dealing with a powerful chieftain or a difficult client, the code provided a script for maintaining dignity and authority. A smith was expected to be polite but firm, never subservient. His expertise gave him a certain social leverage even when dealing with his social superiors. The stories of cursed objects for non-payment, which we explored earlier, can be seen as a dark, supernatural enforcement mechanism of this part of the code. Whether literally believed or simply a powerful rumor, it served to ensure that the smith's work was properly respected and compensated, protecting his livelihood in a world without small claims court. The code also meticulously governed the relationships between master smiths themselves. While they might be competitors in a sense, there was a strong undercurrent of professional courtesy and mutual respect. If a traveling smith arrived in a new territory, the local code would require him to present himself to the established master, a gesture of respect that acknowledged the latter's precedence. They might share a meal, exchange news, and perhaps even trade small secrets or techniques. This prevented conflict and fostered a network of knowledge that could benefit all. However, the code also had a darker side for those who broke it. A smith who was found to have stolen a technique or who consistently produced shoddy work that brought disgrace to the craft could be ostracized. The ultimate punishment was to be declared an outcast by his peers. No other smith would help him, share materials with him, or acknowledge his skill. In a profession that relied on a web of trust and shared resources, this social death sentence could be fatal to a career. This system of self-regulation, enforced by reputation and collective agreement, maintained quality standards across regions without any need for a formal regulatory body. It ensured that the title of Master Smith meant something, that it was a badge of honor earned through adherence to a sacred trust. This unwritten law, this silent code conducted in the language of hammers and the respect of the fire, was the true steel that bound the world of the Iron Age blacksmith together, making it one of history's most secretive and successful professional brotherhoods. But the profound secrets of the forge, the sacred rhythms and guarded techniques we've explored, were not learned overnight. They were passed down through a system of initiation so rigorous and secretive that it constituted a mystery in its own right, the long and arduous journey of the apprentice. Imagine a boy, perhaps 12 or 13 years old, leaving his family's farm to enter the dark, smoky, and deafeningly loud world of the master smith's workshop. This was not merely a change of job, it was a rebirth into a new family, a clan bound not by blood but by fire and secret knowledge. The moment he crossed that threshold, his old life ended. The initiation began not with a hammer in his hand, but with a broom. For the first year, or even longer, his sole duties would be the most menial tasks imaginable: cleaning the workshop, preparing the charcoal by carefully stacking and burning wood in a pit for days on end, and maintaining the relentless rhythm of the bellows. To an outsider, this might seem like simple exploitation, but within the code of the Smiths, it was a deliberate and crucial test of character. The master was watching, always watching. Did the boy complain? Was he lazy? Most importantly, was he observant? Could he be trusted with the profound secrets that were the lifeblood of the craft? This probationary period was a filter designed to weed out those without the requisite patience, humility, and innate curiosity. It was a way of ensuring that only those truly called to the fire would be granted access to its mysteries. This silent observation was the first and most vital stage of learning. Without manuals or written instructions, knowledge was transmitted through demonstration and imitation. The apprentice learned with his eyes and his ears long before he was allowed to use his hands. He would watch the master's every move, the precise angle at which he held the tongs, the subtle shift in the color of the metal that signaled it was ready for the hammer, the specific sound of a well-struck blow versus one that was flawed. He absorbed the sacred sequence of operations, the building of the fire, the heating of the iron, the forging, and the quenching. He learned the smith's secret language, the coded terms for tools and processes that we discussed earlier, understanding that to know the word was to be one step closer to performing the act. This was an education in intuition, in developing a feel for the material that went beyond any verbal explanation. The master would rarely offer praise or lengthy instruction. A grunt of approval or a sharp correction was the typical feedback. The apprentice's success depended entirely on his ability to watch, to internalize, and to replicate through endless, patient repetition. He wasn't just learning a trade, he was being enculturated into a distinct worldview, one where fire, metal, and human will were intertwined in a sacred dance. After years of this silent preparation, the moment would finally arrive when the master placed a hammer in the apprentice's hand and gestured toward the forge. But even then, the progression was meticulously gradual. His first project would not be a sword, but something simple and utilitarian, a plain nail, a crude hook, or a basic rivet. The goal was mastery of the fundamental actions, drawing out the metal, upsetting it to add mass, and shaping it with controlled blows. He might spend months or even another full year producing nothing but nails, each one a test of his ability to control the force and placement of his hammer strikes. Only when he could consistently produce a perfect nail would he be allowed to graduate to more complex objects, a knife, then an axe head, and perhaps after several more years the components of a sword. Each new project introduced a fresh set of challenges and secrets. Forging a pattern-welded billet, for instance, was a privilege granted only to the most advanced apprentices, those who had proven their understanding of heat control and their ability to execute a flawless weld, the most critical and risk-laden moment in the smith's repertoire. The entire apprenticeship, often spanning 7 years or more, culminated in a final, defining test, the creation of a masterpiece. This was not merely a demonstration of technical skill, it was a ritual of passage, a symbolic birth into the ranks of the masters. The master would assign a complex object that incorporated all the skills the apprentice had painstakingly acquired. In some traditions, this might be a specific type of sword with a pattern-welded core and a hardened steel edge. In others, it could be an intricate piece of jewelry or a set of specialized tools. The apprentice would typically have to source his own materials, prepare his own charcoal, and execute every step of the process entirely on his own, under the watchful, silent eye of the master and perhaps other established smiths. The pressure was immense. A single mistake, a flaw in the weld, an error in the heat treatment could mean failure, delaying his acceptance or even ending his journey entirely. The successful completion of the masterpiece was followed by a ceremony that sealed his transformation. This was often a ritual feast where the new master was formally welcomed into the fraternity of smiths. He might be given a new set of tools, symbolically breaking his dependence on his teacher. In some cultures, there were oaths of secrecy to be sworn, binding him to protect the craft's mysteries just as his master had. This final rite of passage completed the cycle. The boy who had entered the workshop as an outsider was now a master himself, a full member of the secretive, familial world of the smiths. He carried within him not just the technical ability to shape metal, but the entire spiritual and cultural weight of the craft, its codes, its secrets, and its sacred connection to the elements. His journey from novice to master was the mechanism by which the enigmatic knowledge of the Iron Age blacksmith was not just preserved, but was allowed to evolve and flourish, ensuring that the fire of the forge would burn brightly for generations to come. We have traveled a long and winding path through 50 enigmatic mysteries that flicker like shadows on the walls of 1,000 ancient forges. We began with the miracle of discovery itself, the improbable leap from rock to metal, and ventured into the sacred space of the workshop, a threshold between worlds where the smith wielded not just a hammer but the very elements. We explored the secret languages spoken over the anvil, the ghostly voices trapped within singing swords, and the legendary creations that seemed to defy the limits of their time, from the rust-resistant iron pillar of Delhi to the watery patterns of Damascus steel. We met the smith as a paradoxical figure, a revered royal armorer and a shunned social pariah, a healer of bones and a suspected shapeshifter, a master of cosmic alignments and a keeper of unwritten ethical codes. Their story is not a simple chronicle of technological progress, but a rich and complex tapestry where every thread is woven from both fact and folklore, from tangible iron and intangible belief. These masters of fire and metal were, in truth, the original polymaths of the ancient world. They were materials scientists who intuitively understood the properties of alloys without a periodic table. They were engineers who constructed furnaces that tapped into the Earth's geothermal heart. They were artists who turned functional objects into canvases of cultural identity. And they were spiritual intermediaries, their work so transformative that it blurred the line between craft and ceremony, earning them a place in the pantheons of gods and the fearsome legends of cursed rings. They stood at the absolute crossroads of their society. Their work determined the outcomes of wars and the success of harvests, making them as strategically vital as any king or general. The mysteries they left behind are not merely puzzles to be solved by modern science. They are windows into a completely different way of seeing the universe, one where the physical and spiritual worlds were inseparable, and where human ingenuity was seen as a collaborative dance with divine forces. And so, as the embers of our journey cool, we are left with a final, lingering question that speaks to the very heart of this exploration. Was the greatest legacy of the Iron Age blacksmith the objects they created, the swords, the plows, the cauldrons that shaped the course of history? Or was it the profound and enduring archetype they forged in the human imagination? They gifted us the timeless figure of the maker, the wizard, the skilled artisan whose hands can bend the raw stuff of the world to a purposeful will. In an age of mass production and digital abstraction, their story reminds us of the deep, fundamental magic inherent in creation itself. The ring of their hammers echoes not just in archaeological finds, but in the stories we still tell, a testament to the enduring power of fire, skill, and mystery. Which of these 50 enigmas captured your imagination most deeply? Was it the spiritual significance of the sacrificial anvil, the cunning strategy behind the rumor of a curse, or the sheer brilliance of the pattern-welded blade? Let the conversation continue. Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've enjoyed this journey into the fire and shadow, be sure to subscribe for more explorations into the hidden corners of history.